Welcome to the Sleep Story Haven, your peaceful sanctuary where the whispers of ancient forests meet the gentle rhythm of moonlit shores. Here, time slows to the rhythm of your breathing. Worries dissolve like mist, and your mind finds the peace it's been seeking. Each story is crafted to guide you through enchanted landscapes and tranquil moments, designed to quiet your thoughts and prepare your spirit for deep, restorative sleep. So find your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and let tonight's gentle tale carry you to the peaceful dreams that await. Welcome to your Sleep Story Haven. Take a deep breath and let our story begin. Mediterranean Coastal Haven. Chapter 1: The Calling of Ancient Waters. The evening mist drifted across the harbor like whispered secrets from the sea, carrying with it the scent of salt and centuries-old stories. Elena stood at the edge of the weathered stone pier, her fingers trailing along the smooth limestone that had been carved by countless hands over generations. The Mediterranean stretched before her in an endless expanse of deepening blue. Its surface, catching the last golden rays of the setting sun like scattered coins across velvet. She had come here seeking something she couldn't quite name, a respite from the relentless pace of her life, a sanctuary where time moved differently, where the ancient rhythms of tide and wind could wash away the accumulated weight of too many hurried days. The small coastal village of Serenata had called to her through a photograph in a forgotten travel magazine. Its whitewashed buildings tumbling down toward the harbor like sleepy children seeking the comfort of their mother's embrace. The fishing boats bobbed gently in the protected cove, their colorful hulls, azure blue, sunset orange, and weathered turquoise, reflecting in the darkening water like floating dreams. Each vessel bore the patina of countless journeys, their wooden sides smooth from the caress of waves and time. The boats seemed to rest now, their day's work done, their nets folded, and their anchors settled deep in the sandy bottom of the harbor. Elena breathed deeply, feeling the sea air fill her lungs with its clean, mineral taste. The stress that had knotted her shoulders for months began to loosen, as if the very molecules of salt air were working to dissolve the tension she carried. The sound of gentle waves lapping against the harbor wall created a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. Or perhaps her heartbeat was learning to match the eternal pulse of the sea. An elderly fisherman worked quietly on one of the boats, his movements slow and deliberate as he mended a net. His weathered hands moved with the practiced grace of someone who had performed this task thousands of times, each motion flowing into the next like a meditation. He glanced up at Elena and offered a gentle nod, his eyes crinkling with the kind of warmth that comes from a lifetime spent watching sunsets over the water. "The sea, she calls to many," he said in accented English, his voice carrying the rhythmic cadence of his native tongue, but she chooses few to truly hear her song. Elena found herself drawn closer to the water's edge, where the waves whispered against the stone with a sound like gentle breathing. The fisherman's words resonated in her chest, awakening something that had been sleeping for too long. She had always loved the ocean, but here, in this timeless place, she felt a connection that went beyond mere appreciation. It was as if the sea recognized her, as if she were returning home to a place her soul had always known. The first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their light reflecting in the calm water like scattered diamonds. The fishing boats swayed gently at their moorings, their masts creating a forest of shadows against the star-filled heavens. The sound of the waves grew softer as the evening progressed, each gentle lap against the stone pier, a note in an endless lullaby that had been sung for millennia. Elena found a smooth stone bench carved into the seawall and settled herself there, feeling the warmth still radiating from the limestone despite the cooling air. The bench had been worn smooth by countless visitors over the years, each person who had sat here adding their own story to the stone's memory. She ran her hands along its surface, imagining all the others who had come here seeking what she sought: peace, restoration, a moment of connection with something larger than themselves. As the night deepened, the village began to settle into its evening rhythm. Warm light spilled from the windows of the small houses that climbed the hillside above the harbor, creating a constellation of golden stars that mirrored those in the sky above. The scent of jasmine and oleander drifted down from the terraced gardens, mixing with the salt air to create a perfume that seemed designed to ease the soul. The waves continued their gentle conversation with the shore, each one carrying whispers of distant lands and ancient voyages. Elena closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, feeling her breathing slow to match the rhythm of the sea. For the first time in months, her mind began to quiet, the constant chatter of worries and responsibilities fading like a radio being slowly turned down. In the darkness behind her closed eyelids, she could see the phosphorescent sparkle of the waves, the way the water caught and held the starlight like liquid mercury. The sensation was hypnotic, drawing her deeper into a state of peaceful contemplation. The bench beneath her felt like a throne carved from the very bones of the earth, a place where she was meant to sit and witness the eternal dance between sea and sky. A gentle breeze arose from the water, carrying with it the coolness of the deep ocean and the warmth of sun-heated stone. It played with her hair and caressed her skin with the tender touch of an old friend welcoming her home. The fishing boats creaked softly at their moorings, their wooden hulls singing in harmony with the wind and waves. Elena opened her eyes to find that the harbor had transformed in the darkness. The water had become a mirror for the stars, creating a seamless connection between heaven and earth. The boats floated like sleeping swans, their forms barely visible except for the gentle glint of starlight on wet surfaces. The village lights created a warm glow that seemed to embrace the entire scene, wrapping it in a cocoon of safety and peace. She understood now why she had been drawn to this place. It wasn't just the beauty of the Mediterranean coast or the charm of the fishing village. It was something deeper, a recognition that here, in this ancient harbor where countless generations had found shelter and sustenance, she could find what her soul had been seeking. The sea had indeed called to her, and she had finally learned to listen. The fisherman had finished his work and was preparing to leave his boat. He moved with the unhurried grace of someone who lived in harmony with the rhythms of tide and season. As he passed Elena on his way up the stone steps that led to the village, he paused and spoke again. "The sea, she has many gifts," he said, his voice soft in the night air. "But the greatest gift is peace. You stay here, listen to her song. She will teach you what you need to know." Elena nodded, understanding that his words were both an invitation and a blessing. She settled more deeply into the stone bench, feeling herself becoming part of the ancient rhythm of this place. The waves continued their gentle lullaby, each one carrying away a piece of the tension and worry that had brought her here. As the night deepened around her, Elena felt herself sinking into a state of profound relaxation. The boundary between herself and the peaceful scene around her began to blur, as if she were becoming part of the eternal conversation between sea and shore. The fishing boats, the starlight on the water, the gentle whisper of waves against stone, all of it was becoming part of her, and she was becoming part of it. The Mediterranean stretched away into the darkness, its depths holding the secrets of ancient civilizations and the dreams of countless travelers who had crossed its waters. But here, in this small harbor, time moved differently. The same stars that had guided Phoenician traders and Roman galleys now watched over Elena's journey toward inner peace. The same waves that had lapped these shores for millennia continued their patient work of healing and restoration. Elena closed her eyes again and let herself drift on the sound of the sea, feeling the first stirrings of the transformation that would carry her through the days to come. The Mediterranean had accepted her, welcomed her into its ancient embrace, and she knew that her journey toward healing had truly begun. Chapter 2: The Harbor's Ancient Embrace. Dawn arrived with the gentle persistence of someone bringing comfort to a sleeping child. The sky lightened gradually from deep indigo to soft pearl, and Elena found herself still seated on the stone bench, having dozed through the peaceful hours of the night. The fishing boats remained in their protective circle around the harbor, but now they seemed to glow with an inner light as the first rays of sun touched their weathered hulls. The transformation of the harbor in the morning light was like watching a painting come to life. What had been shadow and starlight became texture and color, revealing details that the darkness had kept hidden. The water, now a brilliant turquoise near the shore, deepened to sapphire blue toward the horizon. The boats revealed themselves in their full glory, each one a masterpiece of practical beauty, their colors bright against the morning sea. Elena rose from the bench, her muscles pleasantly stiff from the night's rest, and walked slowly along the edge of the harbor. Her feet found the rhythm of an ancient path worn smooth by generations of fishermen, their wives, and visitors who had been drawn to this magical place. Each step seemed to connect her more deeply to the timeless cycle of work and rest, departure and return that had defined this harbor for centuries. The old fisherman from the previous evening emerged from a small boat, painted the deep blue of twilight. His movements were unhurried as he secured his nets and gathered his catch, each action performed with the reverence of ritual. When he noticed Elena approaching, his weathered face creased into a smile that seemed to hold all the warmth of the Mediterranean sun. "You have heard the first song," he said, securing a rope with practiced efficiency. "The sea she sang to you in the night. Now comes the morning song, different, but equally beautiful." As if summoned by his words, other fishermen began to appear throughout the harbor. They moved like dancers in a choreographed performance, each one taking his place in the morning ritual of preparing for the day's journey. Some tended to their nets, running their hands along the fine mesh to check for tears. Others examined their boats with the careful attention of someone checking on a beloved friend. Elena found herself mesmerized by the quiet ballet of their preparations. There was no hurry, no stress, no sense of time pressing against them. Instead, she witnessed a perfect harmony between human intention and natural rhythm. The fishermen worked with the same patient grace as the waves that lapped against their boats, understanding that the sea would provide what it would provide when it was ready to give. "Come," said the old fisherman, whose name she learned was Giuseppe. "Today you learn the harbor's morning song." He guided her to a small cafe that perched on the edge of the seawall like a bird's nest built into the cliff face. The proprietress, a woman of middle years with salt and pepper hair bound in a loose bun, greeted them with the kind of warmth that made Elena feel immediately welcome. The woman's name was Sophia, and her eyes held the same peaceful depth that Elena had noticed in Giuseppe's gaze. "Another soul seeking the sea's wisdom," Sophia said, not as a question, but as a gentle observation. She poured thick, dark coffee into small cups and set before them a plate of fresh bread still warm from the oven, its crust golden and fragrant with herbs from the hillside gardens. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup and breathing in its rich aroma. The flavor was unlike any coffee she had tasted, deep and complex, with hints of cardamom and something else she couldn't identify. But that seemed to capture the essence of the Mediterranean morning. From the cafe's terrace, she could see the entire harbor spread below like a living map of serenity. The fishing boats had begun to venture out toward the horizon, their passage marked by gentle wakes that spread behind them like the wings of seabirds. The water they disturbed quickly returned to its peaceful state, as if the sea were healing itself with each passing moment. "The harbor, she holds many stories," Giuseppe said, settling into a chair worn smooth by years of morning conversations. "Each boat, each stone, each wave carries memory. You sit here, you listen, you become part of the story." Sophia brought them fresh fruit, figs and grapes and oranges that seemed to hold the sunshine within their sweet flesh. Elena bit into a fig and tasted something that went beyond mere flavor. It was as if she were consuming the essence of this place, the warmth of the sun and the richness of the earth distilled into something she could hold and savor. As the morning progressed, Elena found herself settling into the rhythm of the cafe's peaceful routine. Other villagers came and went, each one acknowledged with nods and quiet words of greeting. There was an elderly woman who sat in the corner reading a book, her lips moving slightly as she followed the words. A young mother nursed her baby while gazing out at the sea, her face serene with the particular peace that comes from providing comfort to another. The sounds of the harbor created a symphony of tranquility. The gentle lapping of waves against the stone walls provided the bass rhythm, while the soft conversations of the fishermen and the occasional cry of a seabird added melody. The ropes creaking against the masts, the gentle slap of water against the boat hulls, the whisper of wind through the rigging, all of it combined to create a music that seemed designed to soothe the human soul. Elena closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her, feeling her breathing slow to match the rhythm of the harbor's morning song. The tension that had knotted her shoulders for so long continued its gradual release, as if the Mediterranean air itself contained healing properties that worked their way into her muscles and bones. When she opened her eyes, she found that Giuseppe was watching her with the patient attention of someone who understood the process she was undergoing. His expression held no judgment, only the quiet satisfaction of someone witnessing another person's journey toward peace. "The sea, she works slowly," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not like the land, where things grow fast and die fast. The sea, she teaches patience. She teaches us that the deepest changes happen slowly, like the wearing away of stone." Elena nodded, understanding that she was witnessing something profound in the simple act of sitting by the harbor and watching the boats come and go. This wasn't merely a vacation or a brief escape from her responsibilities. It was something more fundamental, a remembering of rhythms that her body and soul had known long before she was born. Rhythms that connected her to every human who had ever found peace beside the sea. The sun climbed higher, warming the stone walls of the harbor until they radiated heat like gentle heaters. Elena could feel the warmth seeping into her bones, melting away the last vestiges of the cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the isolation and stress of her previous life. As the morning gave way to midday, more fishing boats returned to the harbor, their holds filled with the sea's bounty. Elena watched as the fishermen went about the business of securing their boats and sorting their catch, their movements still unhurried despite the work that needed to be done. There was something deeply satisfying about witnessing this ancient cycle of departure and return. The way the harbor served as both launching point and sanctuary. "The harbor, she is like a mother's arms," Sophia observed, refilling Elena's coffee cup without being asked. "The boats, they go out into the wide world, but they always come home. They know they have a place where they belong, where they are safe." Elena felt the truth of those words resonating in her chest. She had spent so many years feeling unmoored, drifting from one obligation to the next, without ever finding a place where she truly belonged. But here, in this ancient harbor, she was beginning to understand what it meant to have a spiritual home, a place where her soul could rest and restore itself. The afternoon brought a change in the quality of light. The harsh brightness of midday softening into the golden warmth that made the Mediterranean coast famous throughout the world. The fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings, their work done for the day, their hulls warmed by the ancient sun. Elena found herself reluctant to leave the cafe terrace, unwilling to break the spell of peace that had settled over her like a comfortable blanket. Giuseppe seemed to understand her hesitation and made no move to suggest that she should go anywhere else. "Time moves differently here," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "The clocks in the village, they keep the same hours as clocks everywhere. But the real time, the time of the heart, the time of the soul that moves at the speed of the tide. Fast when it needs to be fast, slow when it needs to be slow. As the afternoon deepened toward evening, Elena felt herself settling even more deeply into the harbor's peaceful embrace. The stone walls that enclosed the harbor seemed to pulse with the accumulated tranquility of centuries, each block worn smooth by weather and time, until they had become as much a part of the natural landscape as the cliffs that rose behind the village. The sea continued its endless conversation with the shore, each wave carrying its own message of peace and restoration. Elena closed her eyes and listened to the ancient lullaby, feeling herself becoming part of the eternal rhythm that connected this moment to all the moments that had come before and all that would come after. In the gathering dusk, the harbor revealed another aspect of its beauty. The fishing boats became silhouettes against the darkening water, their forms reduced to their essential grace. The lights of the village began to twinkle like earthbound stars, creating a mirror image of the heavens in the peaceful waters of the harbor. Elena knew that she could sit here forever, cradled in the harbor's ancient embrace, listening to the sea's eternal song. But she also understood that her journey was just beginning, that the Mediterranean had more gifts to offer, more lessons to teach. The harbor had welcomed her, had shown her what it meant to be at peace, and now it was preparing to send her deeper into the healing embrace of the coastal haven she had found. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena felt a profound gratitude wash over her like a warm tide. The harbor had given her something she hadn't even known. She was looking for a sense of belonging, a connection to something larger and more permanent than her individual worries and struggles. She had found her place in the ancient story of human beings, seeking solace beside the eternal sea. Chapter 3: The Village of Whispered Dreams. The cobblestone streets of Serenata wound upward from the harbor like ancient rivers carved in stone, each pathway worn smooth by countless feet over generations of peaceful living. Elena found herself drawn away from the waterfront as the evening stars emerged, following a narrow lane that curved between whitewashed buildings whose walls glowed silver in the moonlight. The stones beneath her feet seemed to pulse with the accumulated memories of all who had walked this way before her. Fishermen returning home, lovers meeting in secret, children racing through the twilight hours of summer evenings. The village revealed itself slowly, intimately, like a treasured book being opened page by careful page. Each turn in the winding street offered new discoveries. A courtyard where jasmine climbed ancient walls, releasing its perfume into the night air. A fountain where water trickled over carved stone with the persistence of centuries. a small shrine where candles flickered behind protective glass, their flames dancing in the gentle breeze that rose from the sea. Elena paused at the fountain, drawn by the musical sound of water meeting stone. The fountain was old beyond measure, its carved basin green with age and softened by countless seasons of rain and sun. Water emerged from the mouth of a stone dolphin, the creature's expression serene and wise, as if it held the secrets of the deep ocean in its weathered features. The sound of the falling water created a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the village itself, steady, peaceful, eternal. An elderly woman emerged from one of the houses that faced the small plaza, her movements deliberate and graceful despite her obvious age. She wore a simple dress of deep blue cotton and carried herself with the dignity of someone who had lived through many seasons and found wisdom in each one. Her eyes, when they met Elena's, held the same depth of peace that Elena had noticed in Giuseppe and Sophia. The fountain, she has been singing the same song for 300 years. The woman said in English touched with the musical accent of the region. My grandmother's grandmother heard this same water, this same music. Sometimes I think the stones remember every prayer that has been whispered here. The woman introduced herself as Katerina, and her voice carried the gentle authority of someone who had served as the village's unofficial keeper of stories. She invited Elena to sit on the stone bench that curved around the fountain's edge, a seat worn smooth by generations of neighbors sharing the events of their days. You have the look of someone who has come far, Katerina observed, settling beside Elena with the careful grace of advanced years, not just in distance, but in the journey of the heart. The village, she has a way of calling to those who need what she offers. Elena found herself opening to this stranger with a trust that surprised her. Perhaps it was the magical quality of the night, or the way the fountain's gentle song seemed to encourage confidence. But she began to speak of the restlessness that had driven her to this place, the sense of searching for something she could not name. Katerina listened with the patience of someone who had heard many such stories, nodding occasionally, but never interrupting. When Elena finished speaking, the older woman was quiet for a long moment, as if allowing the words to settle into the peaceful space between them. The village has always been a place of healing, Katerina said finally. Long before the tourists came, long before the world knew of our existence, people found their way here when their souls needed mending. There is something in the stones, in the water, in the air itself that knows how to comfort the human heart. As if to illustrate her words, a gentle breeze arose from the direction of the harbor, carrying with it the scent of salt and the faint perfume of night-blooming flowers. The candles in the shrine flickered, but did not go out. their flames bending gracefully before returning to their steady glow. "Come," Katerina said, rising from the bench with surprising agility. "Let me show you something that few visitors ever see." She led Elena through a narrow passageway between two houses, a space so small that they had to walk single file. The passage opened into a hidden garden that took Elena's breath away. Terraced into the hillside, the garden cascaded downward in a series of stone-walled levels, each one planted with herbs and flowers that released their fragrances into the night air. Rosemary and thyme, lavender and sage, jasmine and oleander. The garden was a symphony of scents that seemed designed to heal both body and spirit. At the center of the garden, a small stone table and chairs sat beneath an arbor heavy with grapevines, their leaves creating patterns of shadow and moonlight on the ground below. "This garden has been tended by the women of my family for 7 generations," Katerina explained, her voice soft with pride and love. Each one added something new, but always with respect for what came before. The plants, they know the stories of those who cared for them. They carry the love forward, season after season. Elena could feel the accumulated love in this place, could sense the careful attention that had been paid to every plant, every stone, every arrangement of beauty and function. The garden seemed to breathe with life, not just the life of the growing things, but the life of all the human hearts that had found peace in its embrace. They sat at the stone table, and Katerina produced a pot of herbal tea from somewhere Elena hadn't seen her carry it. The tea was made from herbs grown in the garden, chamomile and lemon balm, mint and lavender, and its warmth seemed to spread through Elena's body like liquid contentment. "The village holds many such places," Katerina said, pouring the fragrant tea into cups that seemed to have been made for exactly this purpose. Hidden corners where peace has been cultivated and preserved. The tourists, they see the beauty of the harbor, the charm of the streets, but they do not see the true heart of Serenata. That reveals itself only to those who stay long enough to listen. As they sipped their tea in the garden's peaceful embrace, Katerina began to share the stories of the village. She spoke of the families who had lived here for generations, their lives intertwined like the roots of ancient olive trees. She told of the village during the wars, when the harbor had sheltered refugees, and the people had shared what little they had with those who had nothing. She described the festivals that marked the seasons, celebrations that connected the present to the ancient rhythms of sun and sea. Every stone in the village has absorbed the dreams of those who have lived here, Katerina said, her eyes reflecting the starlight that filtered through the grape leaves above them. The dreams of fishermen hoping for good catches, of mothers praying for their children's safety, of young lovers planning their futures together. The village holds all these dreams, keeps them safe, and shares their power with those who need them. Elena could feel the truth of this in her bones. The village wasn't just a collection of old buildings arranged prettily around a harbor. It was a living repository of human hope and love, a place where the accumulated wisdom of generations had been distilled into an atmosphere of healing peace. As the night deepened around them, other sounds began to emerge from the village's quiet streets. The soft closing of a door, the gentle laughter of children being tucked into bed, the murmur of couples sharing the events of their day. These sounds didn't disturb the peace of the garden, but rather added to it, creating a sense of community and belonging that enveloped Elena like a warm embrace. "The village dreams," Katerina said softly, "and we who live here become part of its dreaming. We carry its peace with us wherever we go, and we add our own dreams to its collection." Elena closed her eyes and let herself become part of the village's dreaming. She could feel her own dreams, the ones she had forgotten, the ones she had abandoned, the ones she had not yet dared to dream, stirring to life in the magical atmosphere of the garden. The herbs around them seemed to pulse with gentle energy, their fragrances carrying away the weight of old disappointments and failures. When she opened her eyes, she found that the garden had become even more beautiful in the deeper darkness. The plants seemed to glow with their own inner light, and the stone walls radiated the warmth they had absorbed during the day. The village lights twinkled in the distance like earthbound stars, each one representing a home where peace was cherished and preserved. "How do you keep it?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you maintain this peace in a world that seems to have forgotten what it means to be still?" Katerina smiled, her face serene in the starlight. "We remember what matters," she said simply. "We tend our gardens, we care for our neighbors, we honor the sea that sustains us. We do not rush toward tomorrow or mourn too long for yesterday. We live in the present moment, and we trust that the village will continue to hold its peace long after we have become part of its dreaming." As they prepared to leave the garden, Katerina picked a small sprig of rosemary and pressed it into Elena's hand. "For remembering," she said. "The village will stay with you now, even when you are far away. You are part of its story, and it is part of yours." Elena held the rosemary to her nose, breathing in its clean, sharp fragrance. The herb seemed to carry within it all the peace of the garden, all the wisdom of the village, all the love that had been cultivated in this magical place over the generations. They walked back through the narrow streets, past the fountain where water continued its ancient song, past the shrine where candles still flickered in their protective glass. The village seemed to pulse around them with quiet life, each building breathing with the dreams of those who slept within its walls. At the edge of the plaza, Katerina paused and looked back at the village spread below them. Serenata means serenade in Italian, she said. The whole village is a song, a lullaby that the earth sings to comfort those who need healing. You have heard the first verses tonight. Tomorrow, you will hear more. Elena nodded, understanding that her journey through the village had been more than a simple evening walk. She had been inducted into something ancient and precious, had become part of a story that stretched back through time and would continue long into the future. The village had shared its secrets with her, had allowed her to taste the peace that came from living in harmony with the eternal rhythms of sea and season. As she made her way back toward the harbor, the sprig of rosemary still clutched in her hand, Elena could feel the village's dreams following her like a gentle benediction. The cobblestones beneath her feet seemed to whisper encouragement, and the night air carried the promise of deeper peace to come. The Mediterranean stretched before her in the darkness, its surface smooth as black glass, reflecting the stars that had watched over this coast for millennia. Elena stood at the edge of the harbor and breathed in the salt air, feeling the village's peace settling into her bones like a healing balm. She had found her way to the heart of Serenata, had been welcomed into its dreaming embrace, and she knew that she would never be quite the same. The village had planted seeds of peace in her soul, seeds that would continue to grow long after she had returned to her other life. But for now, she was content to be held in the gentle arms of this ancient place, to let herself become part of its eternal song of healing and hope. Chapter 4: The Fisherman's Wisdom. The pre-dawn hours held a quality of silence that seemed to suspend time itself, as if the world were holding its breath in anticipation of the sun's return. Elena found herself awakening naturally in the small room she had taken above Sophia's cafe. Her body, already attuned to the rhythms of the Mediterranean village, through the open window, she could hear the gentle sounds of the harbor beginning to stir, the soft lapping of waves against the hulls of fishing boats, the whispered conversations of fishermen preparing for their daily journey into the deeper waters. She dressed quietly and made her way down to the harbor, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand, but trusted completely. The stone steps were cool beneath her feet, still holding the memory of yesterday's warmth, while welcoming the fresh coolness of the approaching dawn. The air carried the scent of salt and seaweed, mixed with the faint perfume of night-blooming flowers that had opened their petals to the stars. Giuseppe was already at work on his boat, moving with the unhurried precision of someone performing a sacred ritual. His weathered hands checked the nets with the tenderness of a musician tuning a beloved instrument, his fingers finding and mending any weakness with the skill of decades. When he noticed Elena approaching, he looked up with a smile that seemed to hold all the warmth of the rising sun. "The sea calls early to some," he said, his voice soft in the pre-dawn quiet. "She knows who is ready to learn her deeper lessons." Elena found herself drawn to help without being asked, her hands moving to assist with the nets, as if she had done this work her entire life. Giuseppe guided her with gentle words and patient demonstration, showing her how to feel for the subtle differences in the rope, how to mend a tear so that the net would hold strong against the pull of the deep waters. "The nets, they are like the human heart," Giuseppe said as they worked together in the growing light. "They must be strong enough to hold what they catch, but flexible enough to move with the current. Too rigid, and they break. Too loose, and they let everything slip away." As they worked, other fishermen began to appear throughout the harbor, each one taking his place in the morning ritual with the quiet efficiency of long practice. Elena watched them move through their preparations, noting how each man's actions contributed to the whole, how the community of fishermen functioned like a single organism, preparing for the day's work. "Come," Giuseppe said when the nets were ready. "Today you learn what the deep water teaches." The boat was named Serenata, and Elena could see why as she stepped aboard. Despite its working nature, every surface had been lovingly maintained, every rope properly coiled, every piece of equipment in its proper place. The boat radiated the kind of care that comes from deep respect, the attention that a craftsman gives to the tools of his trade. As they moved away from the harbor, Elena felt the last solid connection to land slip away beneath them. The sensation was both liberating and humbling, as if she were entering a realm where different rules applied, where the concerns of the land-bound world had no power to reach her. The Mediterranean stretched around them in all directions, its surface beginning to catch the first hints of dawn light. The water was so clear that Elena could see down into its depths, watching the play of light and shadow over the sandy bottom near the shore. As they moved into deeper water, the bottom disappeared into blue-green mystery, the sea revealing its infinite depth. Giuseppe handled the boat with the intimate knowledge of someone who had been reading the sea's moods for most of his life. He adjusted their course based on subtle signs that Elena was only beginning to notice. The way the wind touched the water, the color of the clouds on the horizon, the flight patterns of the seabirds that wheeled and cried overhead. The sea, she speaks in many languages, Giuseppe explained as they settled into their fishing rhythm. The color of the water tells you about the depth, about what swims below. The wind tells you about the weather coming. The birds tell you where the fish are running. you learn to listen. The sea becomes your teacher. Elena found herself falling into the meditative rhythm of the work. The boat rocked gently on the swells, each movement following the ancient patterns of wave and current. The sound of the water against the hull created a constant, soothing background music, while the cries of the gulls added counterpoint to the sea's eternal song. As they worked, Giuseppe shared the wisdom he had accumulated through decades of intimacy with the Mediterranean. He spoke of reading the signs that predicted storms, of finding the deep currents where the fish congregated, of respecting the sea's power while trusting in its ultimate benevolence. The sea, she gives and she takes, he said, his weathered hands steady on the nets. But if you approach her with respect, if you take only what you need and give thanks for what you receive, she will provide. The sea remembers those who honor her, and she protects them in return. Elena felt the truth of his words resonating in her chest. Out here, surrounded by the vast expanse of water, she understood that she was in the presence of something far greater than herself. The sea held the power to create and destroy, to nurture and challenge, to teach and to heal. But rather than feeling small or insignificant in the face of such immensity, she felt connected to something eternal and magnificent. The sun emerged from the horizon like a golden coin rising from the water's depths, painting the sea in shades of amber and rose. The transformation was breathtaking. In moments, the Mediterranean changed from a mysterious realm of shadows to a sparkling expanse of light and color. The fishing boats scattered across the horizon became silhouettes against the brilliant sunrise, each one a testament to humanity's ancient relationship with the sea. As the morning progressed, Elena found herself settling into a state of profound peace. The rhythmic motion of the boat, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the gentle sound of water lapping against the hull, all of it combined to create a sense of being held in the arms of something larger and more enduring than her individual concerns. Giuseppe worked with the quiet concentration of a master, his movements economical and purposeful. Elena watched as he read the subtle signs that told him where to cast the nets, how long to wait, when to draw them in. His relationship with the sea was like a long marriage, intimate, respectful, full of understanding, accumulated through years of shared experience. The sea, she teaches patience above all things, Giuseppe said as they waited for the nets to do their work. In the modern world, everything must happen quickly. But the sea, she moves at her own pace. The fish come when they come. The weather changes when it changes. You cannot hurry the tide or command the wind. You can only learn to work with what is given. Elena closed her eyes and let herself sink deeper into the boat's gentle motion. The Mediterranean swells were long and smooth, each one lifting the boat like a gentle hand before setting it down again. The sensation was profoundly comforting, like being rocked in a cradle that had been crafted by the earth itself. When Giuseppe began to pull in the nets, Elena helped with a growing sense of anticipation. The nets came up heavy with silver fish that flashed and twisted in the morning sunlight. Giuseppe handled each catch with reverence, keeping what was needed and returning the rest to the sea with a whispered blessing. "We take only what we can use," he explained. "The sea gives abundantly, but she expects us to be wise stewards of her gifts. Too much greed, and she withdraws her blessing. But approach her with gratitude and restraint, and she provides for all our needs." As they sorted the catch, Giuseppe shared stories of his life on the sea. He told of storms that had tested his courage, of mornings when the nets had come up empty, of days when the sea had provided beyond all expectation. Through all his stories ran a thread of deep respect for the power and mystery of the waters that had sustained his family for generations. "My grandfather, he fished these same waters," Giuseppe said, his eyes distant with memory. "And his grandfather before him. Each generation learns from the sea, and each one passes the knowledge forward. The sea, she is eternal. We are only visitors, but she teaches us how to live." The morning passed like a meditation, each moment flowing into the next with the natural rhythm of tide and current. Elena found herself forgetting the artificial divisions of time, losing herself in the eternal present of sun and sea and gentle motion. Her breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the waves, her heartbeat synchronized with the ancient pulse of the Mediterranean. As they began the journey back to harbor, Giuseppe offered Elena the tiller, guiding her hands to feel the way the boat responded to the sea's movements. Under his patient instruction, she learned to read the subtle signals that told her when to adjust course, how to work with the current rather than against it. "The boat, she wants to find her way home," Giuseppe said, his weathered hands covering hers on the smooth wood of the tiller. "Your job is not to force her, but to help her follow the path the sea provides. Feel how she speaks to you through the wood, how she tells you what she needs." Elena could indeed feel the boat's communication through the vibrations in the tiller, the way it responded to the push and pull of current and wind. It was like learning a new language, one spoken not in words, but in the subtle conversations between wood and water, between human intention and natural force. As the harbor came into view, Elena felt a bittersweet mixture of relief and regret. The morning on the water had been a profound experience, a journey into a way of being that she had never imagined. But she also felt the pull of the familiar harbor, the safety of the stone walls that had sheltered fishing boats for centuries. "The sea, she will always be here," Giuseppe said, reading her expression with the intuition of someone who had guided many newcomers through their first deep encounter with the Mediterranean. "Once she has touched your heart, you carry her with you always. The peace you feel now, it becomes part of who you are." As they secured the boat to its mooring, Elena helped Giuseppe transfer the morning's catch to the wooden boxes that would carry it to market. Each fish was handled with care, its sacrifice acknowledged with gratitude. The entire process felt like a sacred ritual, a way of honoring the sea's gift while ensuring that it would continue to provide for future generations. Other fishing boats were returning to the harbor, their crews calling out greetings to Giuseppe and curious acknowledgments to Elena. She felt welcomed into this ancient brotherhood of those who made their living from the sea, accepted as someone who had proven herself worthy of the Mediterranean's teaching. As they walked up from the harbor, Giuseppe paused at the stone bench where Elena had spent her first night in Serenata. "You sit here. You think about what the sea has shown you," he said. "The morning's lesson. It needs time to settle into the heart. Like the nets drying in the sun, wisdom must be allowed to cure before it becomes truly useful." Elena settled onto the bench, feeling its familiar warmth beneath her. The harbor spread before her, now busy with the return of the fishing fleet. She watched the boats being secured, the nets being cleaned and mended, the catch being sorted and prepared for market. All of it happened with the unhurried efficiency of people who understood their place in the ancient rhythm of sea and season. The morning's experience had planted something deep in her soul, an understanding of what it meant to live in harmony with forces larger than herself, to find peace in accepting rather than controlling, to discover wisdom in the patient observation of natural rhythms. The sea had taught her its first profound lesson, and she knew that the learning had only just begun. Giuseppe's words echoed in her mind as she sat in the warming sun. "Once she has touched your heart, you carry her with you always." Elena could feel the truth of this settling into her bones, like the warmth of the Mediterranean morning. The peace she had found on the water was becoming part of her cellular memory, a resource she could draw upon long after she had left this magical place. The seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries adding music to the harbor's morning symphony. The waves continued their gentle conversation with the stone walls, each one carrying echoes of the deeper waters, where Elena had found a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. The Mediterranean held her now in its ancient embrace, and she knew she would never be quite the same. Chapter 5: The Healing Gardens of Time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the terraced hillsides above Serenata, where ancient olive trees stood like silver-leafed sentinels, guarding secrets older than memory. Elena found herself drawn upward from the harbor by a path that wound between stone walls covered in climbing roses and wild honeysuckle. The air grew sweeter as she climbed, filled with the mingled fragrances of herbs and flowers that had been cultivated on these slopes for countless generations. The path led to a garden unlike any she had ever seen, not the formal geometric patterns of palace grounds, but something more organic, more alive, as if it had grown from the collaboration between human intention and the earth's own wisdom. Terraced into the natural contours of the hillside, the garden cascaded downward in a series of stone-walled levels, each one a different chapter in a story written in living green. An elderly man worked among the herbs on the highest terrace, his movements slow and deliberate as he tended plants, with the concentration of someone performing a meditation. His hair was white as sea foam, and his weathered hands moved among the leaves with the gentleness of someone who understood that each plant was a living being deserving of respect and care. When he noticed Elena watching from the garden's entrance, he straightened slowly and offered her a smile that seemed to hold all the warmth of the Mediterranean sun. His eyes were the color of sage leaves, and they held the same peaceful depth that Elena had come to recognize as the mark of those who had found their true calling. "Welcome to the garden of ours," he said, his voice carrying the musical accent of the region. "I am Marco, and I have been the keeper of this place for more years than I care to count. But the garden, she has been here much longer than any of us, healing those who need her gifts, teaching those who come to learn." Elena walked slowly into the garden, feeling immediately enveloped by its atmosphere of profound tranquility. The air shimmered with the heat of the afternoon sun, but the garden remained cool and refreshing, protected by the canopy of olive trees and the natural ventilation created by its terraced design. Each level of the garden was devoted to different herbs and flowers, arranged not just for beauty, but for their healing properties. Marco guided her through the upper terrace, where medicinal herbs grew in careful abundance: chamomile and lavender, rosemary and thyme, sage and oregano. The plants seemed to glow with health and vitality, their leaves thick and aromatic, their flowers bright with concentrated color. "Each plant here has a story," Marco said, kneeling beside a patch of chamomile whose white and yellow flowers nodded gently in the breeze. "This chamomile, her seeds came from my grandmother's garden and her grandmother's before that. 7 generations of the same flowers, each one carrying the memory of all who came before." Elena bent to touch the delicate petals and immediately caught the sweet, apple-like fragrance that rose from the disturbed blooms. The scent seemed to go directly to her nervous system, easing tensions she hadn't even realized she was carrying. Around the chamomile, other herbs released their own fragrances into the warming air. The clean sharpness of rosemary, the soothing sweetness of lavender, the earthy richness of sage. The garden works on many levels, Marco explained, as they moved to the second terrace, where roses climbed ancient arbors and jasmine tumbled over stone walls. The eyes see beauty, the nose takes in healing fragrances, the skin feels the touch of living leaves. But the deepest healing happens in the soul, where the garden's peace settles like morning dew on thirsty ground. The second terrace was devoted to flowers that bloomed for their beauty as much as their healing properties. Roses in every shade from cream to deep burgundy climbed trellises and spilled over walls, their petals soft as silk and sweet as honey. Jasmine created curtains of white stars that released their intoxicating perfume into the afternoon air. Oleander bushes heavy with pink and white blossoms provided shade and privacy. Their evergreen leaves a perfect backdrop for the more delicate flowers. Elena found herself drawn to a small stone bench, positioned to catch the afternoon sun, while remaining shaded by an arbor heavy with grapevines. The bench was worn smooth by countless visitors, its surface warm and inviting. As she settled onto it, she felt an immediate sense of rightness, as if this spot had been waiting for her to find it. That is the seat of contemplation, Marco said, settling onto another bench nearby. My grandfather carved it from stone quarried on this hillside. He said that anyone who sat there with an open heart would receive exactly what they needed from the garden. I have seen the truth of this many times over the years. From her position on the bench, Elena could see the entire garden spread below her, a living tapestry of green and gold and silver. The arrangement seemed random at first glance, but as she looked more carefully, she began to see the subtle patterns, the way each plant had been positioned to complement its neighbors, to create microclimates of shade and sun, to encourage the natural flow of air and water through the terraced levels. Below the flower terrace, the garden descended to a level devoted to vegetables and fruits, tomatoes heavy on their vines, zucchini blossoms glowing like small suns, herbs for cooking growing, alongside healing herbs in harmonious abundance. Fig trees laden with ripening fruit provided shade for more delicate plants, while grapevines created tunnels of green coolness between the planted rows. The garden teaches us that healing and nourishment are not separate things, Marco said, following her gaze. The body that is well fed with pure food heals more quickly. The soul that is nourished with beauty grows stronger. The garden provides both, because she understands that human beings are complex creatures with many different needs. As the afternoon progressed, Elena found herself sinking deeper into the garden's peaceful embrace. The combination of visual beauty, healing fragrances, and the gentle warmth of the sun created a state of profound relaxation that seemed to penetrate her very bones. Her breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Her heartbeat synchronized with the patient pulse of growing things. Marco moved through the garden with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned to work in harmony with natural rhythms. He deadheaded roses with the reverence of someone handling sacred objects, watered young plants with the attention of someone feeding beloved children, harvested herbs with the gratitude of someone receiving precious gifts. Time moves differently in the garden, he said, pausing in his work to look out over the terraced levels. The clocks in the village mark the hours, but here we follow the older rhythms, the rhythm of growth, of flowering, of harvest and rest. The garden teaches us that everything has its season, everything has its time. Elena could feel the truth of this in her own body. The frantic pace that had driven her life for so many years seemed not just unnecessary, but impossible in this place. The garden's peaceful atmosphere made it clear that there was a different way to live, a way that honored the natural cycles of effort and rest, growth and contemplation. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Marco invited Elena to help him harvest herbs for the evening tea. They moved through the garden together, selecting leaves and flowers with the care of perfumers, choosing ingredients for a precious blend: chamomile for calming, lavender for peace, lemon balm for joy, mint for clarity, each herb chosen for its specific contribution to the healing brew. The garden gives us what we need when we need it, Marco said, as they gathered the fragrant harvest in a basket woven from olive branches. In spring, she provides herbs for cleansing and renewal. In summer, flowers for joy and abundance. In autumn, fruits and roots for storing strength. In winter, the evergreen herbs that remind us that life continues even in the darkest season. They prepared the tea in a small stone building at the garden's heart, a space that felt more like a shrine than a simple storage shed. Dried herbs hung from the rafters in fragrant bundles, and shelves lined the walls held jars of preserved flowers and roots, each one labeled with care and stored with reverence. Marco brewed the tea with the precision of someone practicing an ancient art, measuring the herbs with intuition rather than instruments, timing the steeping by the color of the water rather than the face of a clock. The resulting brew was unlike any tea Elena had ever tasted, complex and soothing, with layers of flavor that revealed themselves slowly as she sipped. They carried their tea to the highest terrace of the garden, where a small table and chairs sat beneath an ancient olive tree, whose trunk was gnarled with age, and whose branches spread wide enough to shelter a small village. From this vantage point, they could see the entire Mediterranean coast spread before them. The village of Serenata nestled in its protective harbor. The fishing boats returning from their day's work like homing birds seeking rest. This tree was here when my great-grandfather first planted the garden, Marco said, running his hand along the olive tree's silvered bark. She has watched over 7 generations of my family, has sheltered us in storms, and shaded us in heat. The olives she produces make the finest oil in the region. But her greatest gift is her presence, the sense of permanence and peace she brings to all who rest beneath her branches. Elena leaned back against the tree's trunk, feeling the accumulated wisdom of centuries flowing into her tired body. The bark was smooth in some places, deeply furrowed in others, telling the story of drought years and abundant years, of storms weathered and seasons celebrated. The tree held the memory of all who had found shelter beneath its spreading branches, and it seemed to welcome her into that ancient community of seekers and healers. As the sun set over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Elena felt something shift deep in her soul. The garden had worked its magic on her, dissolving layers of stress and worry that she had carried for so long she had forgot they were not a natural part of her being. In their place was growing something new, a sense of connection to the eternal cycles of growth and rest, a trust in the healing power of beauty and silence. The garden will stay with you now, Marco said, as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Even when you are far from this place, you can close your eyes and return here in memory. The peace you have found among these herbs and flowers becomes part of your inner landscape, a sanctuary you can visit whenever you need healing. Elena knew he spoke the truth. The garden of hours had planted seeds of peace in her soul that would continue growing long after she had left this magical place. The fragrance of the herbs, the beauty of the flowers, the wisdom of the ancient olive tree, all of it was becoming part of her cellular memory, a resource she could draw upon for the rest of her life. As they prepared to leave the garden, Marco picked a small sprig of lavender and tucked it behind Elena's ear. "For sweet dreams," he said with a gentle smile. The lavender carries the garden's blessing with it wherever it goes. Walking back down the path toward the village, Elena felt the lavender's soothing fragrance surrounding her like a protective aura. The garden's peace followed her like a gentle shadow, settling into her bones and bloodstream, becoming part of the rhythm of her breathing and the beating of her heart. The stars were emerging in the clear Mediterranean sky as she reached the harbor, their light reflecting in the calm water like scattered diamonds. The fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings, and the village lights created a warm glow that welcomed her home to the peaceful embrace of Serenata. Elena sat once more on the stone bench where her journey had begun, the sprig of lavender still releasing its calming fragrance into the night air. The Garden of Hours had shown her what was possible when human beings worked in harmony with the natural world, when healing and beauty were cultivated with the same patience and reverence given to the growing of food. The Mediterranean stretched away into the star-filled darkness, its surface smooth as black silk, carrying the reflections of ancient constellations that had guided travelers across these waters for millennia. Elena closed her eyes and let herself sink into the profound peace that had become her new natural state. Feeling grateful beyond words for the healing gifts she had received in the Garden of Hours. Chapter 6: The Painter's Vision. The morning light that filtered through Elena's window held a quality she had never noticed before, not just brightness, but depth, as if the air itself had become a medium for color. The lavender Marco had given her still perfumed the small room, its fragrance mingling with the salt air that drifted up from the harbor. Elena found herself drawn to the window, where the view of the Mediterranean had transformed once again, painted in shades of turquoise and sapphire that seemed too beautiful to be real. As she made her way down to the harbor for her morning coffee with Sophia, Elena noticed something different about her perception of the village. Colors seemed more vivid, details sharper, as if someone had adjusted the lens through which she viewed the world. The whitewashed walls of the buildings glowed with an inner light. The red tile roofs seemed to pulse with warmth, and the blue doors and shutters appeared to have been painted with captured pieces of the sky itself. Sophia greeted her with the familiar warmth that had become one of the anchors of Elena's days in Serenata. But today, the cafe proprietress had something new to share, a piece of information that made Elena's heart quicken with anticipation. "There is someone I think you should meet," Sophia said as she poured the rich, aromatic coffee that had become Elena's morning ritual. "An artist who has made his home here for many years. He sees the village and the sea in ways that others miss. And he has been asking about the woman who came seeking peace. I think perhaps you are ready for what he has to offer." The artist's studio was tucked into a narrow building that faced the harbor from an elevated position, its windows commanding a view that seemed to encompass all of Serenata and the Mediterranean beyond. Elena climbed the worn stone steps to the studio with a sense of climbing toward something significant, each step bringing her closer to a new understanding of the beauty that surrounded her. The door was opened by a man of indeterminate age. He could have been 50 or 70. His face so animated and alive that chronological time seemed irrelevant. His hair was silver white and slightly disheveled. His clothes were paint-stained but clean, and his eyes held the particular intensity of someone who saw the world not as it appeared to most people, but as it truly was. "I am Luciano," he said, stepping aside to welcome her into the studio. "And you are Elena, who has come to learn what the Mediterranean can teach. Please come in. The light is particularly beautiful this morning." The studio was a revelation. Canvases lined the walls, each one capturing a different aspect of the village and the sea, but captured in ways that transcended mere representation. Luciano's paintings revealed the emotional truth of Serenata, the peace that emanated from the ancient stones, the joy that danced in the harbor's waters, the profound tranquility that settled over the fishing boats like a blessing. "I have been painting this place for 30 years, Luciano said, leading Elena to a chair positioned before the window that framed the harbor like a living painting. "But I am still discovering new ways to see it, new truths to capture on canvas. The Mediterranean, she changes with every shift of light, every movement of cloud, every season's turning. There is enough beauty here to sustain 1,000 lifetimes of painting." Elena found herself mesmerized by the canvases that surrounded them. Some captured the harbor at different times of day, dawn breaking over the fishing boats, the golden hour of evening when the stone walls glowed like honey, the mysterious blue hour when day surrendered to night. Others focused on details she had never noticed. The way water moved against the hull of a boat, the pattern of shadows cast by nets drying in the sun, the dance of light on the weathered surface of the stone pier. "Painting taught me to truly see," Luciano explained, selecting brushes from a collection arranged with the care of a master craftsman organizing his tools. "Before I became an artist, I looked at things without really seeing them. But when you commit to capturing something on canvas, you must observe it with complete attention. You must understand not just how it appears, but how it feels, how it breathes, how it lives." He gestured toward a canvas that showed the harbor during a gentle rain, the water's surface dimpled with thousands of tiny circles, the fishing boats seeming to float in a world made entirely of silver and gray. "This painting took me 3 months to complete, not because it was technically difficult, but because I had to learn how rain speaks to water, how it transforms the quality of light, how it changes the very atmosphere of the harbor." Elena could see exactly what he meant. The painting didn't just show rain falling on water. It captured the feeling of being embraced by gentle weather, the sense of peace that comes from watching the sea receive the sky's gift with patient acceptance. "Would you like to try?" Luciano asked, setting up a small easel and canvas near the window. Not to create a masterpiece, but to practice seeing. The act of painting changes how you perceive the world around you. It teaches you to notice things that others overlook, to find beauty in the smallest details. Elena had never considered herself artistic, but something about Luciano's gentle encouragement and the magical atmosphere of the studio made her willing to try. He provided her with paints and brushes, showing her how to hold the brush, how to mix colors on the palette, how to approach the canvas without the burden of expectation. "Don't try to paint what you think the harbor should look like," he advised, his voice soft with the patience of someone who had guided many beginners through their first attempts at capturing beauty. "Paint what you feel when you look at it. Paint the peace you have found here, the healing you have experienced. Let your emotions guide the brush." Elena began tentatively, her brush strokes uncertain, but guided by something deeper than technique. As she worked, she found herself entering a state of meditation, similar to what she had experienced in the garden with Marco, in the boat with Giuseppe, in the village streets with Caterina. The act of painting required complete presence, absolute attention to the moment. And in that presence, she found a peace that went beyond anything she had previously known. Luciano worked at his own easel nearby, occasionally offering gentle guidance, but mostly allowing Elena to discover her own relationship with the paints and canvas. The studio filled with the comfortable silence of people engaged in meaningful work, broken only by the sound of brush against canvas and the gentle lapping of waves in the harbor below. As the morning progressed, Elena's painting began to take shape. It wasn't technically accomplished, but it captured something essential about her experience of Serenata. The way the village seemed to glow with inner light, the sense of ancient peace that emanated from the harbor, the feeling of being held in the embrace of something larger and more enduring than her individual concerns. "You see," Luciano said, pausing in his own work to observe Elena's progress, "you are not just painting the harbor. You are painting your relationship with this place, your response to its beauty. This is what true art does. It reveals the connection between the observer and the observed, the love that flows between the heart and the world." Elena stepped back to look at her painting, amazed by what had emerged from her tentative brush strokes. The colors seemed to pulse with life. The forms seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the sea. It was as if she had managed to capture not just the appearance of the harbor, but the feeling of being at peace in this magical place. The Mediterranean has been inspiring artists for thousands of years, Luciano said, cleaning his brushes with the reverence of someone performing a sacred ritual. The light here, the way it reflects off the water and the white walls, the way it changes throughout the day, it has a quality that awakens something in the human soul. It makes us see beauty where we might have seen only the ordinary. He showed Elena more of his paintings, each one revealing another aspect of the village's character. There were portraits of the fishermen at their work, their faces weathered by sun and salt, but peaceful, with the deep satisfaction of people living in harmony with their environment. There were studies of the village women, their expressions serene with the particular contentment that comes from being part of an unbroken community. I came here originally for a 2-week vacation, Luciano said with a laugh that held no regret. That was 30 years ago. The village captured my heart, and I found that I couldn't leave. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that I didn't want to leave. I had found my true home, the place where my soul could flourish. Elena understood completely. Each day in Serenata had deepened her connection to this place, had shown her new aspects of the peace and beauty that seemed to be woven into the very stones of the harbor. The village was more than just a destination. It was a teacher, a healer, a sanctuary for souls seeking restoration. As the afternoon light began to slant through the studio windows, Luciano set up a fresh canvas and invited Elena to paint with him. This time, instead of trying to capture the harbor as it appeared, he encouraged her to paint her vision of the perfect, peaceful place, to let her imagination merge with her memory of Serenata, to create something entirely new. Elena found herself painting a harbor that was both the one outside the window and something more, a place where the water glowed with inner light, where the fishing boats seemed to float on liquid stars, where the ancient stones pulsed with the accumulated peace of centuries. It was Serenata, as she experienced it in her deepest moments of meditation. The village, transformed by the love and gratitude she felt for the healing it had provided. This is how the place truly looks, Luciano said, studying Elena's painting with the attention of a master recognizing truth in unexpected forms. Not to the physical eyes, but to the eyes of the heart. You are painting Serenata as it exists in the realm of spirit, where beauty and peace are the fundamental reality. As the sun began to set over the Mediterranean, painting the studio in shades of gold and rose, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. The act of painting had taught her to see not just with her eyes, but with her entire being, to recognize beauty as a living force that connected all things in a web of meaning and delight. Luciano helped her clean her brushes and secure her paintings so they could dry properly. Take them with you when you go, he said, but more importantly, take with you the eyes that painted them. You have learned to see beauty as it truly is, not as decoration or distraction, but as medicine for the soul. Elena carefully gathered her paintings, feeling as if she were holding pieces of her own transformation. The canvases captured not just her vision of Serenata, but her journey toward a new way of being in the world, a way that recognized beauty as essential to human flourishing, that understood art as a form of prayer, that saw in every moment the possibility of wonder. As she prepared to leave the studio, Luciano handed her a small tube of paint, a particular shade of blue that he mixed himself from pigments and meditation. "This is the color of Mediterranean peace," he said, "when you return to your other life. When the world tries to convince you that beauty is a luxury you cannot afford, take out this paint and remember. Remember that you carry this color within you now, that you have learned to see with the eyes of love." Elena tucked the tube of paint into her pocket, feeling its weight like a talisman. The blue was the exact shade of the water in the harbor during the magical hour just before dawn, when the sea seemed to hold all the peace in the world within its depths. Walking back through the village streets as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena carried with her more than paintings and paint. She carried a new way of seeing, a transformed relationship with beauty, an understanding that art was not something separate from life, but the very heart of living fully. The harbor welcomed her back with its familiar embrace, the fishing boats bobbing gently at their moorings, their forms now visible to her not just as working vessels, but as sculptures carved by wind and wave, as poems written in wood and rope and sail. The Mediterranean stretched away into the star-filled darkness, its surface smooth as black silk painted with silver light. Elena sat once more on the stone bench that had become her anchor in this peaceful world, her paintings beside her like windows into her own transformation. The village slept around her, dreaming its ancient dreams of sea and sun and endless peace. And Elena, surrounded by beauty, both visible and invisible, began to understand that she had found something far more precious than a vacation. She had found a new way of being alive in the world. Chapter 7: The Ancient Olive Grove. The path that led away from the village wound upward through terraced hillsides, where olive trees stood in silver-leafed battalions, their gnarled trunks bearing witness to centuries of Mediterranean seasons. Elena found herself drawn to explore this ancient landscape on her 7th morning in Serenata, pulled by an intuition that the olive groves held secrets she was ready to discover. The morning air was sweet with the fragrance of wild herbs, thyme and oregano, rosemary and sage, that grew between the carefully tended rows of trees. Each olive tree was unique, shaped by its own history of weather and harvest, its trunk twisted into forms that spoke of endurance and patience. Some trees were clearly ancient, their hollow centers testament to their great age, while others were younger, but already showing the characteristic grace that came with decades of rooting deep into the Mediterranean soil. As Elena walked deeper into the grove, she became aware of a profound silence that was different from the quiet of the village or the harbor. This was the silence of deep time, of roots that had been drawing sustenance from the earth for generations, of leaves that had been whispering secrets to the wind for centuries. The olive trees created a cathedral of living architecture, their branches forming natural arches overhead, their leaves filtering the sunlight into patterns of gold and green. She paused beside a tree that seemed especially ancient, its trunk so gnarled and twisted that she could see faces and figures in its bark, stories written in wood by the patient hand of time. The tree radiated a sense of deep peace, of having found its perfect place in the world and settled there with complete contentment. "She is 500 years old, perhaps more," said a voice behind her. Elena turned to see a woman approaching through the grove, her movements unhurried and graceful. The woman appeared to be in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair bound loosely at the nape of her neck, and clothing that spoke of practical elegance. A simple dress of natural linen, sturdy sandals, hands that showed the signs of working with the earth. "I am Benedetta," the woman said, extending a hand that was warm and calloused from years of working among the trees. "My family has tended this grove for 8 generations. Each tree here is known to us, has its own personality, its own story." "This one," she said, placing her hand on the ancient trunk, "has survived droughts and floods, wars and celebrations. She has fed countless families, provided oil for lamps and cooking, medicine for healing. She is a patriarch of this grove, a teacher of endurance." Elena found herself drawn to touch the tree as well, her hand resting on bark that felt warm despite the morning coolness. Under her palm, she could feel the slow, patient pulse of the tree's life force, the deep contentment of a being that had found its perfect place in the world and needed nothing more than to continue growing, season after season, toward the sun. "The olive trees, they teach us about time," Benedetta said, beginning to walk deeper into the grove. "In the modern world, everything must happen quickly. But the olives, they show us the value of patience. They grow slowly, live long, give their gifts year after year without complaint. They understand that the most precious things cannot be rushed." As they walked among the trees, Benedetta shared the wisdom she had learned from a lifetime spent in their shade. She spoke of reading the signs that told her when the trees needed water, when they were ready for pruning, when the olives were at their perfect moment for harvest. She explained how each tree was an individual, with its own preferences and needs, its own way of responding to the seasons. "My grandmother taught me to listen to the trees," Benedetta said, pausing beside a younger olive whose branches were heavy with developing fruit. She said that if you spend enough time with them, really pay attention, they will tell you everything you need to know about living well. They show us how to bend without breaking, how to find nourishment in simple things, how to give generously while staying rooted in what matters most. Elena could feel the truth of these words settling into her understanding like seeds finding fertile ground. The olive trees around them seemed to embody a way of being that she had been searching for without knowing it. A deep rootedness combined with graceful flexibility. A generous spirit that gave freely while maintaining its own essential strength. Benedetta led her to a clearing in the center of the grove, where the oldest trees formed a natural circle around a space that felt sacred in its simplicity. Here, ancient stones had been arranged into low seats, worn smooth by generations of workers who had come here to rest during the heat of the day. The space felt like an outdoor temple, a place where the wisdom of the trees had been absorbed into the very earth. "This is where my family has always come to make important decisions," Benedetta said, settling onto one of the stone seats with the ease of long familiarity. The trees, they have a way of helping us see clearly, of reminding us what truly matters. In their presence, the urgent things of daily life find their proper proportion. Elena chose a stone seat facing the most ancient of the trees, feeling immediately grounded by the solid warmth of the stone beneath her and the patient presence of the olives surrounding them. The air in the clearing shimmered with heat, but the shade of the trees kept the space cool and comfortable. A gentle breeze moved through the silver-green leaves, creating a sound like whispered prayers or ancient songs. "The trees have taught my family many things over the generations," Benedetta continued, her voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing treasured stories. "They have shown us that strength comes not from rigidity, but from flexibility, that the deepest roots grow in the darkest soil, that the most beautiful growth happens slowly and cannot be forced." As Benedetta spoke, Elena found herself entering a state of deep listening that went beyond words. The olive trees seemed to be participating in the conversation, their leaves rustling with agreement, their branches swaying in rhythms that matched the flow of wisdom being shared. The grove itself felt alive with accumulated knowledge, as if 8 generations of human understanding had merged with the tree's ancient wisdom to create something greater than either could achieve alone. During the war, when food was scarce and the world seemed to have gone mad, the trees sustained us, Benedetta said, her eyes distant with memory. They gave us olives to eat and oil to cook with and trade. But more than that, they gave us hope. Every morning, we would come to the grove and see that the trees were still there, still growing, still reaching toward the sun. They reminded us that life continues, that peace will return, that beauty endures even in the darkest times. Elena could imagine those wartime mornings, could picture families gathering among the trees for comfort and sustenance. The grove would have been a sanctuary then, just as it was now, a place where the eternal rhythms of growth and harvest provided perspective on the temporary chaos of human affairs. As the morning sun climbed higher, Benedetta showed Elena how to read the signs that told the story of each tree's health and history. She pointed out the scars where branches had been pruned, explaining how careful cutting encouraged new growth. She showed Elena how to recognize the trees that were thriving and those that needed extra attention, how to spot the signs of disease or pest damage before they became serious problems. Working with the trees teaches patience above all things, Benedetta said, demonstrating the proper technique for hand harvesting olives. Her movements gentle and efficient. You cannot hurry an olive to ripen, cannot force a tree to produce more than it is ready to give. You learn to work with natural rhythms, to wait for the right moment, to trust that the tree knows better than you do when it is ready to share its gifts. Elena tried the harvesting technique herself, learning to roll the olives gently from the branches without damaging the delicate bark or disturbing the developing buds that would become next year's fruit. The work was meditative in its repetition, requiring just enough attention to quiet the busy mind while allowing deeper awareness to emerge. As they worked together among the trees, Elena found herself falling into the same peaceful rhythm she had discovered while fishing with Giuseppe and painting with Luciano. The olive grove seemed to encourage this state of mindful presence. This way of being fully engaged with the moment while remaining connected to something timeless and eternal. My great-grandmother lived to be 97, Benedetta said, as they moved to another tree. This one heavy with olives just beginning to turn from green to the deep purple-black of perfect ripeness. She used to say that the trees had taught her the secret of longevity. Grow slowly, she would tell us. Put down deep roots. Bend with the storms, but never abandon your ground. Give generously, but never give everything. Save something for the next season. Elena could feel the wisdom in these words, could sense how they applied not just to the cultivation of olive trees, but to the cultivation of a life well lived. The grove was teaching her about sustainability in the deepest sense, not just the sustainable management of natural resources, but the sustainable management of the human spirit. As the day grew warmer, Benedetta led Elena to a stone building nestled among the trees. So perfectly integrated into the landscape that it seemed to have grown from the earth itself. This was the traditional olive mill, where the family had been pressing oil for generations. Its stone walls thick enough to keep the interior cool, even in the heat of summer. Inside, the mill was both ancient and timeless. The great stone wheels that crushed the olives had been carved centuries ago, their surfaces worn smooth by countless seasons of use. The wooden presses looked like sculptures, their aged timbers dark with oil and time. Everything in the mill spoke of traditions passed down unchanged through generations, of methods that had been perfected through centuries of patient refinement. The oil we make here is not just food, Benedetta explained, running her hand along the smooth stone of the ancient mill wheel. It is medicine, it is light, it is connection to all who came before us and all who will come after. Each bottle carries the essence of this place, the love of these trees, the wisdom of the earth that nurtured them. She showed Elena jars of oil from different harvests, each one with its own character and story. The oil from the oldest trees was deep and complex, with flavors that spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom. The oil from younger trees was bright and fresh, full of the eagerness of youth. Each type had its place, its purpose, its own contribution to the family's annual harvest. As the afternoon progressed, Elena helped Benedetta with the various tasks that kept the grove healthy and productive. They pruned dead branches, cleared weeds from around the tree trunks, checked the irrigation systems that supplemented the rainfall. Each task was performed with the kind of attention that transformed work into meditation, that made labor into a form of prayer. The trees give us so much, Benedetta said as they rested in the shade during the hottest part of the day. Food and medicine, shade and beauty, connection to the land and to our ancestors, but perhaps their greatest gift is the example they set. They show us how to live with dignity, how to age gracefully, how to give generously while maintaining our strength. Elena looked around at the grove, seeing it now not just as a collection of trees, but as a community of beings that had learned to live in perfect harmony with their environment. Each tree was an individual, but all were connected through their roots in the shared soil, their branches reaching toward the same sun, their leaves dancing to the same wind. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Benedetta picked a handful of perfect olives and pressed them between her fingers, releasing their rich oil onto Elena's palms. "Rub this into your skin," she said. "Let the grove's blessing become part of you." The oil carries the essence of this place, the peace of these trees, the wisdom of the earth. Elena rubbed the oil into her hands and arms, feeling its richness sinking into her skin like liquid silk. The oil carried the fragrance of the grove, green and clean and alive, with undertones of earth and sun and centuries of careful cultivation. As it absorbed into her skin, she felt as if she were absorbing some of the tree's own peace and patience. "The olive trees will remember you now," Benedetta said as they prepared to leave the grove. "You have worked among them, have learned from them, have received their gifts. You are part of their story now, and they are part of yours. Wherever you go, you will carry their teaching with you." Elena knew this was true. The grove had changed something fundamental in her understanding of what it meant to live well. The trees had shown her a way of being that was both deeply rooted and gracefully flexible, that could endure hardship while maintaining essential strength, that could give generously while never depleting its core resources. As they walked back through the grove toward the village, the setting sun painted the olive trees in shades of gold and silver. The leaves rustled with the evening breeze, creating a sound like gentle applause, as if the trees were acknowledging the day's lessons and blessing Elena's journey toward deeper wisdom. The village of Serenata came into view below them, its white buildings glowing in the evening light, its harbor cradled in the protective arms of the ancient stone walls. From the elevated perspective of the grove, Elena could see the entire magical world she had discovered. The fishing boats resting peacefully at their moorings, the gardens cascading down the hillsides, the streets where she had learned to walk at the pace of peace. "This view never grows old," Benedetta said, pausing to look out over the village and the sea beyond. "Every evening, I come to this spot and give thanks for the privilege of living in such beauty, of being part of something so much larger and more enduring than my individual life." Elena understood completely. The view from the olive grove encompassed not just physical beauty, but spiritual depth, showing her the interconnectedness of all the elements that had contributed to her healing journey. The sea that had taught her patience, the village that had shown her community, the gardens that had demonstrated the cultivation of peace, all of it visible from this elevated sanctuary where the trees had taught her the deepest lessons of all. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena made her way back to the harbor with olive oil still fragrant on her skin, and the trees' wisdom settling into her bones. The grove had given her a new understanding of time, not as a resource to be consumed, but as a medium in which growth and wisdom could slowly mature. The Mediterranean stretched away into the star-filled darkness, its surface smooth as black glass, reflecting the ancient constellations. Elena sat once more on her familiar stone bench, feeling the accumulated peace of all her days in Serenata surrounding her like a protective aura. The olive trees had taught her how to be rooted while remaining flexible. how to give generously while maintaining strength, how to live with the patient grace of beings who understood their place in the eternal cycle of seasons. The fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings, and the village slept peacefully around the harbor, dreaming its ancient dreams. Elena closed her eyes and felt herself becoming part of those dreams, part of the eternal story of human beings learning to live in harmony with the rhythms of earth and sea and sky. Chapter 8: The Monastery of Silence. The ancient bell tower of San Benedetto del Mare rose from a promontory north of Serenata, like a finger pointing toward heaven. Its weathered stones golden in the morning light. Elena had noticed the monastery from various points in the village, but today she felt called to make the pilgrimage along the coastal path that led to its peaceful sanctuary. The walk would take her away from the harbor for the first time since her arrival. But something deep within her soul suggested that the monastery held lessons she was ready to receive. The path began where the village streets ended, winding along cliff tops that offered breathtaking views of the Mediterranean stretching away to the horizon. Below, waves carved their eternal patterns into the rocky coastline, creating small coves and hidden beaches where the water glowed turquoise in the shallows and deepened to sapphire in the depths. The morning air was crisp with salt and filled with the cries of seabirds that rode the updrafts along the cliffs. As Elena walked, she found herself settling into the rhythm that had become natural to her during her days in Serenata. Unhurried, attentive, open to whatever the journey might offer. The path was ancient, worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims and visitors seeking the particular peace that monastic communities cultivated. Each step seemed to carry her not just toward the monastery, but toward a deeper understanding of the silence she had been gradually discovering within herself. The monastery appeared gradually, revealed by turns in the coastal path like a secret being slowly shared. First, the bell tower, then the red tile roofs, then the cream-colored walls that seemed to grow from the very rock of the promontory. San Benedetto del Mare had been built to harmonize with its natural setting, to complement rather than dominate the rugged beauty of the Mediterranean coast. The entrance to the monastery was marked by an ancient wooden gate set into walls that radiated centuries of accumulated peace. A small sign indicated visiting hours and requested that guests observe the silence that was the foundation of the community's spiritual practice. Elena paused at the threshold, feeling the same sense of crossing into sacred space that she had experienced in the olive grove, in the healing garden, in the deep waters with Giuseppe. Brother Thomas greeted her in the monastery's reception area, his presence radiating the particular kind of calm that comes from years of contemplative practice. He was a man of middle years, with gentle eyes and hands that moved with the unhurried grace of someone who had learned to find the sacred in simple tasks. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and measured, as if each word had been considered before being offered. "Welcome to San Benedetto," he said, his English touched with an accent that suggested origins far from the Mediterranean. "We have been expecting you, though perhaps you did not know you were coming here until today." The monastery has a way of calling to those who are ready for what silence can teach. Elena found herself unsurprised by his words. Each stage of her journey in Serenata had seemed to unfold with this same sense of rightness, as if she were following a path that had been prepared for her long before she arrived. Brother Thomas led her through courtyards where fountains murmured quietly among carefully tended gardens. The monastery had been designed around the principles of contemplative architecture, spaces that encouraged reflection, proportions that induced calm, views that lifted the spirit toward transcendence. Every detail spoke of centuries of refinement, of understanding how physical environment could support spiritual growth. The monastery was founded in the 12th century by monks seeking a place where they could live in harmony with the sea and sky. Brother Thomas explained as they walked through a cloister whose arched openings framed views of the Mediterranean. Over the centuries, it has served as a beacon of peace for this coast, a place where the ancient practice of contemplation has been preserved and shared. The heart of the monastery was the chapel, a simple space whose beauty lay in its perfect proportions and the quality of light that filled it. Tall windows faced east toward the rising sun, while smaller openings offered glimpses of the sea and sky. The walls were whitewashed stone, unadorned except for a single wooden crucifix whose weathered surface spoke of centuries of prayer and devotion. "Here we gather 7 times each day to pray together," Brother Thomas said, his voice barely above a whisper in the sacred space. "The rhythm of prayer punctuates our days, reminds us that time itself can be a form of worship, that the hours are gifts to be received with gratitude rather than resources to be consumed." Elena settled into one of the simple wooden chairs that faced the altar, feeling immediately enveloped by the chapel's atmosphere of profound peace. The silence here was different from any she had previously experienced, not merely the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper, something that spoke directly to the soul without need for words. "Silence is the monastery's greatest teacher," Brother Thomas continued, taking a seat nearby. "In the beginning, people find silence difficult, even frightening. They are accustomed to noise, to distraction, to the constant chatter of the mind. But gradually, if they are patient, they discover that silence is not empty, but full of presence, full of peace, full of the love that underlies all existence. As if summoned by his words, the bell in the tower began to toll, calling the community to the noon prayer service. Elena watched as brothers began to file into the chapel, each one moving with the unhurried grace of people who had learned to live in harmony with contemplative rhythms. They took their places without fuss or ceremony, settling into silence as naturally as birds settling onto their roosts. The service that followed was unlike anything Elena had experienced. There were prayers spoken in Latin, their ancient words creating a bridge between the present moment and centuries of faithful practice. There were periods of pure silence when the only sounds were the distant murmur of the sea and the soft breathing of the gathered community. There were chants that seemed to rise from the very stones of the chapel, carrying the voices of the brothers into harmony with the eternal rhythms of creation. Elena found herself drawn into the service not as an observer, but as a participant, her own breathing synchronizing with the rhythm of the prayers, her heart opening to the profound peace that emanated from the gathered community. The experience was beyond denomination or doctrine. It was a direct encounter with the sacred dimension of existence, a taste of the peace that dwells at the center of all authentic spiritual practice. When the service concluded, the brothers filed out as quietly as they had entered, returning to their various tasks with the same unhurried grace they had brought to prayer. Brother Thomas remained with Elena in the chapel, allowing her time to absorb what she had experienced. "The life we live here is very simple," he said after a long period of companionable silence. "We pray, we work, we study, we care for the monastery and for each other, but within this simplicity, we have found something infinitely rich, a way of being that connects us to the deepest currents of life, to the peace that the world cannot give or take away." He showed Elena through the monastery's working areas, the garden where vegetables grew in neat rows, tended by brothers who understood that cultivation of the earth was inseparable from cultivation of the spirit, the library where ancient texts were preserved and copied by hand, each letter written as an act of devotion, the workshop where simple furniture was crafted with the attention that transformed manual labor into meditation. "Everything we do here is prayer," Brother Thomas explained as they watched an elderly brother carefully binding a newly copied manuscript. There is no separation between the sacred and the ordinary, between prayer and work, between contemplation and action. Life itself becomes a continuous offering to the divine. Elena understood that she was witnessing a way of life that had been preserved across across centuries, a demonstration that it was possible to live in harmony with the deepest values of human existence. The monastery offered an alternative to the frantic pace of modern life, a proof that peace and purpose could be found in simplicity and silence. As the afternoon progressed, Brother Thomas invited Elena to participate in the monastery's daily work. She found herself in the garden, helping to tend tomatoes and herbs under the guidance of Brother Francis, a monk who had spent 40 years learning to read the subtle signs that told him what each plant needed. The garden teaches us about patience and trust, Brother Francis said, his weathered hands gentle as he showed Elena how to support the heavy tomato vines. You plant the seeds, you provide what care you can, but ultimately you must trust in forces larger than yourself. The sun, the rain, the soil, these do the real work. We are only partners in the miracle of growth. Working in the garden, Elena felt her understanding deepen of the lessons she had been learning throughout her time in Serenata. The monastery garden was like all the other spaces of healing she had discovered, the harbor where Giuseppe taught patience, the village where Caterina shared wisdom, the artist's studio where Luciano revealed beauty, the olive grove where Benedetta demonstrated rootedness. Each place had contributed to her growing understanding of what it meant to live in harmony with the deeper rhythms of existence. As the sun began to set over the Mediterranean, Brother Thomas led Elena to a simple cell where guests were invited to experience the monastery's contemplative silence. The room contained only the essentials: a narrow bed, a small table, a chair, a window that framed a view of the sea. But the simplicity was not austere. It was spacious, offering room for the soul to expand and breathe. Spend the evening in silence, Brother Thomas suggested. Let the monastery's peace settle into your bones. Listen to what emerges when the noise of the world falls away. The silence here has been cultivated for 800 years. It carries within it the prayers and insights of countless seekers who have found what they were looking for. Elena settled into the cell's peaceful simplicity, feeling immediately held by its atmosphere of contemplative calm. Through the window, she could see the Mediterranean stretching away toward the horizon, its surface painted rose and gold by the setting sun. The view encompassed the entire coast that had become her sanctuary, the village of Serenata nestled in its protective harbor, the hillsides terraced with olive groves and gardens, the ancient stones that had sheltered generations of seekers. As darkness gathered, the monastery settled into its evening rhythm. She could hear the soft footsteps of brothers moving through the corridors, the distant sound of the final prayer service, the gradual settling into the deep silence that would carry the community through the night hours. the silence was not empty, but full, pregnant with the peace that comes from lives dedicated to the cultivation of inner stillness. Elena found herself entering a state of meditation deeper than any she had previously experienced. The monastery's accumulated peace seemed to support her own journey into silence, carrying her beyond the usual chatter of thoughts and worries into a space of pure awareness. In that space, she found not emptiness, but fullness, the presence of love that Brother Thomas had spoken of, the peace that underlies all the surface turbulence of life. Hours passed without her awareness of time. She sat in the simple chair by the window, watching the stars emerge over the Mediterranean, feeling herself becoming part of the eternal silence that connected all things. The monastery had offered her its greatest gift, not just quiet, but the kind of profound stillness in which the soul recognizes its true nature. When the bell tolled for midnight prayer, Elena felt herself being gently called back to ordinary awareness, but she carried with her the deep peace she had touched in the silence. The understanding that this stillness was always available, always present beneath the surface activities of daily life. She made her way quietly through the monastery corridors to the chapel, where a few brothers had gathered for the night prayer. The service was brief and simple, mostly silence punctuated by whispered prayers that seemed to rise naturally from the gathered peace. Elena felt herself part of a tradition that stretched back through centuries, connected to all who had found in monastic silence the peace that the world could not provide. As she prepared to return to Serenata the following morning, Brother Thomas walked with her to the monastery gate. The coastal path stretched before her, leading back to the village that had become her temporary home. But she knew she would carry the monastery's silence with her wherever she went. The silence you have touched here is not confined to these walls, Brother Thomas said as they paused at the threshold. It is the fundamental nature of existence, the peace that is always present if we learn how to listen. You can return to this silence anytime, anywhere, simply by remembering what you have experienced here. Elena nodded, understanding that the monastery had given her something even more precious than peace. It had shown her that the deepest sanctuary was not a place, but a way of being. Not something external, but something that dwelt eternally within her own heart. The morning sun painted the Mediterranean in shades of gold and turquoise as she began her walk back to Serenata. Behind her, the monastery bell tower stood silhouetted against the sky, a beacon of contemplative peace that would continue its ancient work long after she had returned to her other life. But within her, the silence the monastery had revealed continued to resonate, a gift that would transform every moment of her remaining days. Chapter 9: The Festival of Stars. The evening of Elena's 9th day in Serenata brought with it an excitement that hummed through the village like electricity before a storm. But this anticipation carried only joy and celebration. She had awakened that morning to find the harbor bustling with activity, unlike anything she had witnessed during her peaceful days among the fishing boats and quiet cafes. Colorful banners stretched between the buildings. Tables appeared in the plaza around the fountain, and the scent of special foods being prepared drifted from every kitchen. Tonight is the Festival of Stars, Sophia explained as Elena joined her for morning coffee. The cafe proprietress's eyes bright with the particular joy that comes from anticipating a cherished tradition. Once each summer, when the moon is dark and the stars shine brightest, the whole village celebrates the ancient connection between sea and sky. It is said that on this night, the Mediterranean holds all the starlight within its depths, and those who witness it are blessed with peace that lasts until the stars return. Elena could feel the village's excitement building throughout the day as she moved through her now familiar routines. Giuseppe and the other fishermen had returned early from their morning work, spending the afternoon decorating their boats with garlands of flowers and strings of lights that would transform the harbor into a floating constellation. In the streets, families emerged from their houses carrying dishes that contributed to the communal feast, each one adding to the growing abundance that would be shared among all who gathered. Katerina appeared in the plaza wearing a dress of midnight blue embroidered with silver stars. Her silver hair crowned with a wreath of jasmine that released its perfume into the evening air. She moved through the preparations with the graceful authority of someone who had helped organize this celebration for decades, directing the placement of tables, the arrangement of food, the stringing of lights that would create magic when darkness fell. The Festival of Stars is older than memory, Katerina explained, as Elena helped her arrange wildflowers in simple vases that would grace each table. My grandmother's grandmother told stories of this celebration, and her grandmother before that. It connects us to the ancient peoples who lived along this coast, who understood that the stars and the sea were lovers, meeting each night in an embrace that renewed the world. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Marco appeared from his healing garden carrying baskets filled with herbs that would be used to prepare the traditional festival tea. The fragrance that rose from his baskets was complex and mysterious. Lavender and chamomile, lemon balm and mint, but also stranger scents that spoke of plants that bloomed only at certain times, that released their magic only under specific stars. The festival tea is prepared only once each year, Marco said, as he began the careful process of blending the herbs according to recipes passed down through generations. Each herb is gathered at the perfect moment when its healing properties are strongest. When steeped together under the light of the stars, they create a brew that opens the heart to the deeper mysteries of existence. Luciano emerged from his studio carrying canvases that would be displayed around the plaza. Paintings that captured the magic of previous Festival of Stars celebrations. Elena recognized his distinctive style, but these paintings seemed to glow with an inner light, as if he had managed to capture not just the visual beauty of the festival, but its spiritual essence. The Festival of Stars brings out something special in the light, Luciano explained as he carefully positioned his paintings where they would catch the glow of the lanterns being hung throughout the plaza. It is as if the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds becomes thinner, allowing beauty to shine through more clearly. Every year, I try to capture this magic, and every year the reality exceeds what I can paint. As twilight deepened, Benedetta arrived from the olive grove carrying bottles of oil that had been pressed especially for the festival. The oil seemed to glow with golden light, and when she opened one of the bottles, the fragrance that emerged was like concentrated sunshine, carrying the essence of centuries-old trees and earth, blessed by countless seasons of growth. The festival oil is made from olives harvested under the full moon, Benedetta explained as she began filling small lamps that would float on the harbor's surface. It burns with a light that the ancients believed could attract the attention of the stars, calling them down to dance with their reflection in the water. Even Brother Thomas appeared from the monastery, his simple brown robes making him nearly invisible in the gathering darkness, until he stepped into the glow of the festival lights. He carried with him a bell whose tone was so pure and sweet that Elena felt it resonating in her chest when he demonstrated its voice for the gathered villagers. The monastery has rung this bell at every festival of stars for 400 years, Brother Thomas said, his quiet voice somehow carrying clearly through the plaza despite the growing crowd. Its sound is said to open a channel between earth and heaven, allowing the blessings of the night to flow freely to all who are present. As full darkness settled over Serenata, the Festival of Stars began in earnest. The harbor had been transformed into a wonderland of reflected light. The fishing boats outlined in strings of lanterns that created constellations on the water's surface. The floating oil lamps that Benedetta had prepared drifted among the boats like fallen stars, their gentle flames dancing with each small movement of the tide. In the plaza, tables groaned under the weight of food that had been prepared with love and anticipation. Fresh fish grilled over olive wood, vegetables from the monastery garden, bread baked in ovens that had been heating stones for centuries, olives and cheeses and fruits that captured the essence of the Mediterranean in every bite. But the centerpiece of the feast was the festival tea, served in cups that seemed to have been crafted specifically for this moment, each one unique, but all sharing the same ethereal beauty. Elena found herself seated at a table with all the friends she had made during her time in Serenata, surrounded by the people who had taught her the various aspects of peace she had discovered. Giuseppe sat to her right, his weathered face glowing in the lantern light as he shared stories of festivals past. Sophia was across from her, her eyes bright with the joy of seeing her village share its magic with someone who truly appreciated its gifts. As the first stars began to appear in the clear Mediterranean sky, the festival's deeper magic began to reveal itself. The boundary between celebration and spiritual experience started to dissolve as the gathered community settled into a rhythm that was both ancient and eternal. Conversations became softer, laughter more musical, and everyone seemed to move with the unhurried grace that Elena had come to recognize as the natural pace of life in harmony with deeper rhythms. Brother Thomas rose and moved to the center of the plaza, the ancient bell in his hands catching and reflecting the light of countless lanterns. When he began to ring it, the sound that emerged was unlike anything Elena had ever heard, not just the voice of bronze and craftsmanship, but something that seemed to carry the accumulated prayers and celebrations of 4 centuries. The bell's voice rose into the star-filled night, and as its tone faded, something magical happened. The stars above seemed to pulse with brighter light, and their reflections in the harbor water began to dance and swirl, as if the sea itself were celebrating. Elena looked up and gasped. The night sky over Serenata was ablaze with more stars than she had ever seen, as if the festival had indeed called them down from their distant homes to participate in the earthly celebration. Every year it happens, Katerina whispered, her voice full of wonder despite having witnessed this miracle dozens of times. The stars come closer on this night, drawn by the love and gratitude of our community. They bless us with their light, and we bless them with our celebration of the beauty they bring to the world. The festival tea was served as the stars reached their brightest intensity, each cup filled with liquid that seemed to hold starlight within its depths. Elena lifted her cup with trembling hands, feeling the warmth of the herbs and the accumulated love of all who had prepared them. When she tasted the tea, flavors exploded across her palate, not just the individual herbs that Marco had blended, but something more complex, something that tasted like peace itself, like joy distilled into liquid form. Around the plaza, Other villagers were experiencing their own moments of transcendence as they sipped the festival tea and gazed up at the miraculous night sky. Children who had been running and playing earlier now sat quietly in their parents' laps, their eyes wide with wonder as they witnessed magic that would become one of their treasured childhood memories. Elderly residents who had seen many Festival of Stars celebrations still looked up at the sky with the amazement of those witnessing a miracle for the first time. Elena felt something shifting deep within her consciousness as she continued to sip the festival tea and gaze at the star-drunk sky. The various lessons she had learned during her time in Serenata: patience from the fisherman, community from the village, beauty from the artist, growth from the gardener, rootedness from the olive grove, silence from the monastery, all began to merge into a single understanding that was greater than the sum of its parts. She understood now that her journey to Serenata had not been a coincidence, that each person she had met and each lesson she had learned had been preparing her for this moment of integration. The Festival of Stars was not just a celebration, but a graduation, a moment when all the scattered pieces of wisdom she had gathered could coalesce into a new way of being in the world. As the night deepened, music began to emerge from various corners of the plaza. Not performed music, but the spontaneous songs that arise when people's hearts are full of joy and gratitude. Voices joined together in melodies that seemed to have existed forever, harmonies that spoke directly to the soul without need for words. Elena found herself humming along, her voice blending with the others as naturally as waves blending with the shore. The floating oil lamps in the harbor began to move in patterns that seemed choreographed by invisible hands, creating shifting mandalas of light on the water's surface. The fishing boats rocked gently at their moorings, their lantern-outlined hulls creating a constellation that mirrored the stars above. The entire scene pulsed with life and light and love, as if the universe itself were celebrating the connection between heaven and earth. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of overwhelming gratitude rather than sadness. She had found what she had come seeking without even knowing what it was. Not just peace, but a way of living that honored the interconnectedness of all things, that found the sacred in the ordinary, that recognized every moment as an opportunity for wonder and celebration. As the festival reached its crescendo, with stars blazing overhead and the harbor dancing with reflected light, Elena felt herself becoming part of something infinitely larger than her individual existence. She was part of the village, part of the Mediterranean, part of the ancient tradition of human beings gathering under the stars to celebrate the mystery and beauty of existence. The festival continued deep into the night, time measured not by clocks, but by the slow wheel of constellations overhead and the gradual shifting of the tide in the harbor below. Elena lost herself in the celebration, dancing to music that seemed to rise from the earth itself, sharing food that tasted like concentrated joy, laughing with friends who had become family in the space of a few magical days. As the hours passed, the celebration gradually transformed from active festivity to peaceful contemplation. People began to settle onto blankets spread in the plaza, lying on their backs to gaze up at the star-filled sky. The floating oil lamps in the harbor continued their gentle dance, but the music softened to whispered melodies that seemed designed to carry the celebrants into dreams filled with starlight. Elena found herself lying on a blanket between Giuseppe and Sophia, their familiar presence anchoring her to the earth, while her spirit soared among the constellations. The festival tea had opened doorways in her consciousness that allowed her to perceive the connections between all things, the way the stars' light traveled across vast distances to illuminate the Mediterranean, the way the sea reflected that light back to the heavens, the way the human heart could participate in this cosmic conversation through gratitude and wonder. "This is why we live here," Giuseppe said softly, his weathered hand pointing to a particularly bright constellation that seemed to be dancing just above the horizon. Not just for the fishing or the beauty or the peaceful life. We live here because this place remembers the connections, because here we can still participate in the ancient conversation between earth and sky. Sophia nodded in agreement, her voice dreamy with the peace that had settled over the entire gathering. Every festival of stars, I remember again why I chose to make my life in this village. There are easier places to live, more convenient places, places with more opportunities. But where else can you lie under stars like these and know that you are part of something eternal? As the night reached its deepest point, Brother Thomas appeared again with his bell. But this time its voice was softer, more intimate, like a lullaby sung to the entire village. At the sound of the bell, the floating oil lamps in the harbor began to move toward the open sea, carrying their light out into the Mediterranean darkness like messengers dispatched to spread the festival's blessing to distant shores. Elena watched the lights drift away until they became indistinguishable from the stars reflected in the water. Understanding that she was witnessing the festival's culmination, the moment when the celebration on Earth merged completely with the cosmic dance of light and darkness. The village had offered its gratitude to the universe, and the universe had responded with a display of beauty that would live in memory long after the last lamp had disappeared into the night. As dawn approached, the Festival of Stars began its gentle conclusion. The celebrants slowly gathered themselves from their blankets and cushions, their movements unhurried and peaceful, as if they were emerging from a shared dream that none wanted to end. The stars gradually faded as the eastern sky began to lighten. But their blessing remained, settled into the hearts of all who had participated in the night's magic. Elena helped clear the plaza, working alongside her friends to restore the village to its everyday configuration. But everything had been transformed by the festival's magic. The ordinary stones of the streets seemed to glow with inner light. The familiar buildings radiated a peace that went beyond their physical beauty. And the harbor held the memory of star-filled water in its gentle morning waves as the sun rose over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Elena found herself back on the stone bench that had become her anchor in this magical place. The festival had shown her the culmination of everything she had learned in Serenata, the way peace and community, beauty and contemplation, work and celebration could all merge into a single, integrated way of being in the world. Giuseppe joined her on the bench, his eyes still bright with the wonder of the festival night. "You have seen our greatest treasure now," he said, his voice soft with the contentment that comes after perfect celebration. Not just the beauty of the village or the peace of our daily life, but the way we remember to live in connection with the larger mystery. This is what we offer to those who come seeking what you have been seeking. Elena nodded, understanding that the Festival of Stars had been the climax of her journey, the moment when all the separate lessons had merged into a single understanding. She had learned not just how to find peace, but how to live in a way that honored the connections between all things, that found the sacred in both the ordinary and the extraordinary, that recognized every day as an opportunity for gratitude and wonder. The morning sun warmed the stones of the harbor wall, and the fishing boats began their gentle preparations for another day's work. But Elena knew that this day would be different from all the others, not because the routine had changed, but because she had changed. The Festival of Stars had completed her transformation, had shown her a way of being in the world that she could carry with her wherever her journey might lead. As the village settled into its familiar rhythm of morning activities, Elena felt a deep peace settling into her bones, a peace that was no longer fragile or temporary, but had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. The stars had blessed her with their light. The village had blessed her with its wisdom. And she knew that she would never be quite the same. The Mediterranean stretched away toward the horizon, its surface beginning to sparkle with the dance of morning light. Elena sat on her stone bench and watched the eternal conversation between sea and sky. understanding now that she had become part of that conversation, that the peace she had found in Serenata was not something she could lose, but something that had become woven into the very fabric of her being. Chapter 10: The Eternal Return. The morning of Elena's 10th day in Serenata arrived with a quality of light that seemed both familiar and extraordinary, as if the festival's magic had permanently altered the way illumination touched this ancient coast. She awakened in her small room above Sophia's cafe with the peaceful energy of someone who had completed a profound transformation, yet also with the bittersweet awareness that her time in this sanctuary was drawing to a close. The village stirred to life around her with its familiar rhythm, but Elena noticed that she was experiencing each sound, each scent, each glimpse of Mediterranean blue with heightened awareness. It was as if the festival of stars had sensitized her to the constant miracle of ordinary existence, teaching her to perceive the sacred dimensions that had always been present, but which her hurried previous life had trained her to overlook. She dressed slowly, savoring the simple ritual of beginning the day without urgency or agenda. Through her window, she could see the harbor where Giuseppe and the other fishermen were preparing their boats with the same patient care they brought to their work every morning. But today, their movements seemed to carry an extra grace, as if they too had been touched by the festival's magic and were moving through their routines with renewed awareness of their beauty. Downstairs, Sophia was preparing breakfast with the same loving attention she had shown every morning of Elena's stay. But today, there was something ceremonial in her movements, as if she understood that this was a special meal, a farewell feast disguised as an ordinary breakfast. The festival changes everyone, Sophia said, as she poured the aromatic coffee that had become one of Elena's treasured daily rituals. Even those of us who have experienced it many times find ourselves seeing with new eyes the morning after. But for someone encountering it for the first time, especially someone who came seeking what you were seeking, the transformation can be profound. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup and breathing in its rich fragrance. The simple pleasure of morning coffee had been transformed during her time in Serenata from a necessity to fuel the day's activities into a meditation on gratitude and presence. "I feel different," Elena said, searching for words to describe the change she sensed in herself. "Not just peaceful, though I am more peaceful than I've ever been. It's more than that. It's as if I've remembered something I had forgotten, or learned something I always knew but couldn't access." Sophia nodded with the understanding of someone who had witnessed many transformations in her years of welcoming visitors to the village. Serenata has a way of awakening what was always there," she said. "The peace you have found here was not something we gave you. It was something you rediscovered within yourself. The village simply provided the conditions where that remembering could occur." As Elena ate her breakfast, fresh bread still warm from the oven, local honey that tasted like concentrated sunshine, fruit that seemed to hold the essence of the Mediterranean itself. She found herself reviewing the journey that had brought her to this moment. Each encounter, each lesson, each moment of beauty had contributed to a transformation that felt both gradual and sudden, like the way dawn slowly illuminates the world, until suddenly it is fully day. After breakfast, she made her way to the harbor where Giuseppe was putting the finishing touches on his boat's morning preparations. When he saw her approaching, his weathered face creased into a smile that held all the warmth of their shared mornings on the Mediterranean waters. "Today you return to the deep water one last time," he said, and Elena understood that this was both an invitation and a blessing. "The sea wishes to offer you her final teaching before you continue your journey." They sailed out beyond the harbor into the deeper waters, where Elena had first learned to read the subtle communications between human intention and natural force. But today, as the village of Serenata receded behind them, and the vast expanse of the Mediterranean opened before them, Elena felt that she was not just revisiting a familiar experience, but completing a circle that had begun the moment she first stepped onto the stone pier. The morning was perfect for sailing. Enough wind to fill the sails, but gentle enough to allow for easy conversation. Enough sun to warm their skin, but not so much as to be oppressive. The Mediterranean spread around them in all directions, its surface painted in every shade of blue that had ever existed. From the pale turquoise of the shallows to the deep sapphire of the distant depths, the sea remembers everyone who has ever sailed upon her, Giuseppe said, as they settled into the peaceful rhythm of deep water sailing. She carries the stories of ancient mariners and modern fishermen, of traders and explorers and pilgrims seeking new shores. When you sail these waters, you become part of that eternal story. Elena could feel the truth of his words as she helped trim the sails and adjust their course. The Mediterranean seemed to welcome her as an old friend, its waves lifting their boat with the same gentle care she had experienced on her first journey into these waters. But now she understood that she was not just being carried by the sea, she was participating in its ancient conversation with those who approached it with respect and gratitude. As they sailed farther from shore, Elena found herself entering the meditative state that had become natural to her during her time in Serenata. The rhythmic motion of the boat, the sound of water against the hull, the play of light on the waves, All of it combined to create a sense of being held in the arms of something infinitely larger and more enduring than her individual existence. "What will you take with you when you leave?" Giuseppe asked as they anchored in a quiet cove where the water was so clear that they could see schools of fish swimming in the depths below. Elena considered the question as she watched the fish move through the underwater landscape with the same peaceful efficiency that characterized all life in and around Serenata. "Everything," she said finally. "I don't think it's possible to experience what I've experienced here and leave any of it behind. The peace, the beauty, the way of being in the world, it's all become part of me now." Giuseppe nodded, his eyes crinkling with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully shared something precious. "The village gives her gifts freely, but she asks only one thing in return, that those who receive her healing carry it forward. Share it with others who are seeking what you were seeking when you arrived." As they sailed back toward Serenata, Elena felt the weight and joy of this responsibility settling into her consciousness. She had been given a great gift during her time in this Mediterranean sanctuary. And with that gift came the obligation to serve as a bridge between the peace she had found and the world that desperately needed such peace. The village appeared on the horizon like a jewel set into the coastline, its white buildings glowing in the afternoon sun, its harbor opening to welcome them home. Elena felt a pang of bittersweet emotion as she recognized the approaching end of this phase of her journey, but it was tempered by the understanding that she was not losing Serenata, but carrying it with her into whatever came next. As they secured the boat at its mooring, Elena helped Giuseppe with the tasks that had become ritual during their shared mornings on the water. But today, each action felt ceremonial, as if they were not just completing the day's work, but blessing the tools and practices that had been vehicles for her transformation. The afternoon was spent in a series of gentle farewells that felt more like blessings than goodbyes. Elena visited Marco in his healing garden, where he prepared a small packet of seeds from the plants that had contributed to her restoration. "Plant these wherever you settle," he said, pressing the packet into her hands. "They carry the garden's healing power with them, and they will help you create sanctuary wherever you are." She spent time with Katerina in the village fountain plaza, listening to stories about travelers who had found peace in Serenata over the years and had gone on to share that peace with their communities. "You join a long tradition," Katerina said, her eyes bright with the joy of someone witnessing another link being added to an ancient chain of healing. Luciano showed her one final painting he had completed during her stay, a portrait of the harbor at the moment when the Festival of Stars reached its crescendo, with the water holding all the light of heaven within its depths. "This is how you will always remember this place," he said, And this is how this place will always remember you. Benedetta met her at the entrance to the olive grove, carrying a small bottle of oil pressed from the oldest trees. This oil has been blessed by 800 years of growth, she said. Use it sparingly, but use it whenever you need to remember the patience and wisdom of the trees. Even Brother Thomas appeared as the evening approached, bringing with him a small stone from the monastery's foundation. Carry this as a reminder that the silence you have touched is always available, he said. In any moment, in any place, you can return to the peace you have discovered here. As the sun began to set on her last day in Serenata, Elena found herself once again on the stone bench that had been her anchor throughout this journey. The harbor spread before her, painted in the golden light that made every evening here feel like a masterpiece being unveiled for the first time. All of her friends gathered in the plaza as the evening deepened, sharing a final meal that felt both like celebration and communion. The food was simple but perfect. Fresh fish from the morning's catch, vegetables from the monastery garden, bread baked with grain grown in the surrounding hills, wine that captured the essence of Mediterranean sunlight. As they ate, each person shared a blessing for Elena's journey ahead, words that were both farewell and benediction. Giuseppe spoke of the patience of the sea and the wisdom that comes from working in harmony with forces larger than oneself. Sophia blessed her with the warmth of community and the joy that comes from serving others. Marco offered the healing power of growing things and the peace that comes from cultivating beauty. When the meal was finished and the stars began to appear in the clear Mediterranean sky, Elena felt a profound gratitude washing over her like a warm tide. She had come to Serenata seeking something she couldn't name, and she had found not just peace, but a complete transformation of her understanding of what it meant to be fully alive. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she looked around at the faces that had become dear to her in such a short time. "By carrying forward what you have received," Katerina said gently, "by living the peace you have found here, by helping others discover their own path to the sanctuary that exists within every human heart." As the evening drew to a close, Elena made her way one last time to the stone bench where her journey had begun. The Mediterranean stretched away into the star-filled darkness, its surface smooth as black glass, reflecting the ancient constellations that had guided travelers across these waters for millennia. She sat in the familiar peace of the harbor, feeling the accumulated blessing of her 10 days in Serenata, settling into her bones like warm honey. The village slept around her, dreaming its ancient dreams of sea and sun and endless peace. And Elena, transformed by love and beauty, and the patient wisdom of those who had chosen to live in harmony with the deeper rhythms of existence, prepared to carry that peace into the world that waited beyond the horizon. The fishing boats bobbed gently at their moorings, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and the Mediterranean whispered its endless lullaby to the shore. Elena closed her eyes and felt herself becoming part of that eternal song, understanding finally that the peace she had found in Serenata was not something she could lose, but something that had become woven into the very fabric of her being. Chapter 11, Epilogue, The Lighthouse Within. 6 months had passed since Elena left the Mediterranean sanctuary of Serenata. But the village lived within her with such vivid presence that she could close her eyes and instantly return to the stone bench overlooking the harbor, could breathe in the salt air and hear the gentle lapping of waves against the weathered pier. The transformation that had begun during her 10 days in that magical place had continued to unfold like a flower opening to the sun, revealing new petals of understanding with each passing day. She had returned to her life in the city, but nothing was quite the same. The apartment that had once felt like a cage now seemed spacious with possibility. The job that had once drained her energy now provided opportunities to practice the patience and presence she had learned from Giuseppe and the sea. The relationships that had once felt superficial now offered chances to cultivate the kind of community she had witnessed in the village plaza. The seeds that Marco had given her from his healing garden had taken root in pots arranged on her balcony, creating a small sanctuary of green peace in the urban landscape. Each morning, she tended them with the same reverence she had learned in the monastery, understanding that the act of caring for growing things was itself a form of prayer. The olive oil from Benedetta's ancient trees sat in a place of honor in her kitchen, used sparingly but regularly to anoint food that she prepared with the same attention to beauty and nourishment that Sophia had shown in her cafe. Each meal became an opportunity to practice gratitude, to remember the interconnectedness of sun and soil, and see that brought sustenance to her table. Luciano's painting of the Festival of Stars hung in her living room, and the tube of Mediterranean blue paint he had given her remained carefully preserved, a talisman that reminded her daily that beauty was not a luxury, but a necessity, not decoration, but medicine for the soul. She had begun painting again herself, discovering that the eyes he had taught her to see with remained open, ready to perceive the sacred dimensions of ordinary existence. The stone from the monastery's foundation sat on her bedside table, and each night before sleep, she would hold it and return in memory to the profound silence that Brother Thomas had helped her discover. the peace she had touched in that contemplative space remained accessible. A sanctuary she could visit any time the world grew too loud or demanding. Most importantly, she had begun to share what she had received, like ripples spreading from a stone dropped into still water. The peace of Serenata moved through her interactions with others. Colleagues noticed her increased calm and began asking about her transformation. Friends sought her out when they needed someone who could listen with presence and patience. Strangers seemed drawn to the quality of peace she carried, as if recognizing something they desperately needed. She had started a small group that met weekly in her apartment, sharing meditation and conversation about finding sanctuary in modern life. The group had grown organically, each person bringing others who were seeking what Elena had found in Serenata. They called themselves the Lighthouse Keepers, understanding that each person who found inner peace became a beacon for others navigating the storms of contemporary existence. The teaching came naturally, flowing from the deep well of peace that Serenata had opened within her. She shared Giuseppe's wisdom about patience and working in harmony with forces larger than oneself. She offered Marco's understanding of how healing and beauty were inseparable. She demonstrated Sophia's practice of creating community through simple acts of hospitality and care. Sometimes, in the midst of the group's meditations or conversations, Elena would feel the presence of her teachers from Serenata so strongly that she half expected to open her eyes and find herself back in the village plaza. The distance between that sanctuary and her current life seemed to collapse, as if the peace she had found there existed outside of time and space, available to anyone who learned how to access it. Letters arrived occasionally from her friends in Serenata, written in the careful script of those for whom written communication was still a conscious art. Giuseppe wrote of the sea's changing moods and the lessons it continued to offer. Sophia shared news of other visitors who had found healing in the village's embrace. Marco described new plants he was cultivating in his garden and the seasonal rhythms that continued to guide his work. Each letter was a gift that reconnected Elena to the source of her transformation, reminding her that the peace she carried was not her own creation, but something she had received and was called to share. The village lived not just in her memory, but in the way she moved through the world, in the quality of attention she brought to each moment, in the peace she radiated without effort or intention. As the seasons changed, Elena found herself marking time not just by the calendar, but by the deeper rhythms she had learned in Serenata. She celebrated the spring equinox by planting new seeds from Marco's garden. She honored the summer solstice by creating a small festival of stars' celebration on her building's rooftop, sharing the tradition with her neighbors, and watching their faces light up with wonder at the beauty of the urban night sky. The autumn brought a deepening of her practice, as if the cooler weather encouraged the kind of contemplation that Brother Thomas had taught her. She spent longer periods in silence, allowing the peace within to expand and mature like wine aging in hidden cellars. The winter months became a time of integration, of allowing the lessons of Serenata to settle more deeply into her bones. And through it all, the Mediterranean lived within her like a second heartbeat, its eternal rhythms pulsing beneath the surface of her daily life. She could feel its presence in the rhythm of her breathing, could hear its lullaby in the quiet moments between activities, could taste its salt in the tears of gratitude that came whenever she fully grasped the magnitude of the gift she had received. People began seeking her out specifically for the peace she carried, drawn by something they couldn't quite name, but desperately needed. She found herself becoming a kind of ambassador for the sanctuary that existed within every human heart, a living reminder that transformation was possible, that peace was not just a distant dream, but a present reality available to anyone willing to undertake the journey. The lighthouse within her grew brighter with each person she helped, each moment of peace she shared, each time she chose presence over urgency, beauty over efficiency, depth over superficial comfort. She understood now that her time in Serenata had not been an escape from her real life, but a preparation for living her real life more fully, more consciously, more in harmony with the eternal rhythms that connected all existence. As she sat in her apartment on a quiet evening, exactly 1 year after her return from Serenata, Elena felt a profound completion settling around her like a gentle blanket. The transformation that had begun with her first glimpse of the Mediterranean harbor had reached a new level of integration. She was no longer someone who had visited a place of peace. She had become a place of peace, a sanctuary where others could find the healing they sought. The fishing boats in the harbor of her memory bobbed gently in their eternal rest, and the stars above the village plaza continued their ancient dance, and the Mediterranean continued its endless conversation with the shore. And Elena, thousands of miles away, but somehow still present in that magical place, closed her eyes and added her own voice to the eternal lullaby that the earth sings to comfort all who seek healing, all who yearn for peace, all who journey toward the sanctuary that has always been waiting within their own hearts. The lighthouse within her burned steady and bright, a beacon of Mediterranean peace in the urban night, calling others home to themselves, home to the peace that was their birthright, home to the sanctuary that could never be lost because it had always been there, waiting patiently for the moment when they would remember how to listen to its eternal song of healing and hope. The waves whispered against distant shores, and the olive trees rustled in Mediterranean breezes, and the ancient stones of Serenata held their accumulated peace through another night. And somewhere in the vast web of connection that linked all seekers of truth, Elena felt the presence of everyone who had ever found sanctuary beside the eternal sea. Everyone who carried peace like a flame passed from heart to heart. Everyone who understood that the deepest journey was not to distant places, but to the sacred space that dwelled forever within the human soul. The story was complete, but like all true stories of transformation, it was also just beginning, ready to unfold again in the heart of anyone who heard its call. Anyone who felt the stirring of recognition that peace was possible, that sanctuary was real, that the Mediterranean of the soul was always just a breath away, always ready to receive the weary traveler in its ancient, healing embrace.